has started.
Okay, it is 12:03. We call to order the meeting of November 22nd, VCBB. Board members in attendance. We have Brian, Holly, Patty Richards in attendance in person. Christine, Executive Director, is with us, and Rob is remoting in virtually. Is Laura on?
I don't see Laura yet.
Okay.
It's called in.
All right, so Laura's not on and Dan is unable to make it, but we do still have a quorum with Brian, Holly, and myself in person. So the first thing so the agenda and packet was sent out to us, and the first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda and look for any requests or request of the agenda. And I would like to make a proposal that this board meeting be limited to 2 items, specifically the construction grant RFP, item 4, and then item 3 being secondary VCBB outside plant requirements is number 3. And if we have time, those two together, if we have time, then we take up other items on the agenda. This meeting is a special meeting specifically for those 2 items.
Can I raise one small concern?
Yes, Rob.
At this point, Deerfield Valley does not have any grant applications, so does not have access to any of their funds. So that would be a concern in punting this to the next meeting, especially if it's not going to be till further into December.
Holly.
The executive director's report did not create a position on this issue, but did offer approaches to the grant. I think we should authorize staff to proceed with the grant with the condition that they know that there's a make-ready question open. I mean, those funds cannot be distributed inconsistent with our resolution, but the grant can be issued and funds could start to flow, just not the make-ready funds.
But can we take this up at the very end? Can we do that?
It's fun, but okay. So I'm sorry I engaged with Rob.
Yeah,
you're right.
But what I would like to do, if we can spend 5 minutes on it and nail those, great. But I want to make room for the 2 items on the agenda that we said we promised to address.
I think that the staff has the ability to move forward and should. And if we can agree on that, then that's the 5 minutes, and we could be done for today on this. And then we'll take it up at another meeting.
So are you saying that that staff could authorize the 2.156?
I'm saying they could. We voted on a grant. They could follow our vote. We voted on a grant. We also voted on a resolution. No make-ready expenditures other than the permits. They could start authorizing expenditures consistent with those 2.
And there's no motion that's required here because we already
We're done.
This. I'm fine with that. Brian,
can you do that, Christine?
Of course.
So they have 2.156,188 million, and the outstanding is the make ready, which is 1.955130.
Well, yeah, the number's a little different because they
whatever it is.
Yeah,
whatever.
But don't worry about it.
Okay.
That should come.
Okay, I will execute the grants agreement, and we could deal with this later. For the board's knowledge, there's 2 hands up. I don't know if now's the time.
Yeah, the point you're making is you said it clearly. Did one resolution to another. I understand my direction.
Okay, all right. Can I ask whose hand is up? I don't want to turn this into a 20-minute discussion.
David Jones and Ann Manwaring.
All right, you have 5 minutes between the 2 of you or less.
And when's our next meeting that we can take this up on? Is December.
So if we are not going to meet on the 29th.
Well, Rob and I are on vacation, so we got to get a board packet out and
we have plenty of.
But if we don't have to do we could do a board packet with existing material.
So many existing issues.
Yeah, we had this one today
because
we had to have so many meetings.
Right.
I will do a list and offer it to you.
No, that's right.
Like it.
Well, if we could carry on with the existing, materials. Because
so
the following Monday, that's not a problem.
we will have
Let's
another
open it up for
pre-construction
5
grant
minutes
as
or
well.
less to the Deerfield Valley folks. And time is on as of right now. You have 5 minutes.
And you begin.
Okay. Okay, anybody from Deerfield Valley?
Hands on you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Russ.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was on mute. This is Ann. It is our hope that you will revisit the issue of your proposed moratorium on any pre-construction funding going toward Make Ready, because it puts us in a significant bind. We outlaid that pretty thoroughly in the memo that we sent you all this morning. So obviously getting approval for the rest of our work to go forward, because we're already doing it and we expect to be billed soon, that is great. But I just want to make a case, and we presented a proposal for how we could get past this in our memo. And I'm hoping that you will be able to consider that. David?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. We would think twice about signing a grant agreement that did not include any make-ready expenditure and completely precluded the ability to obtain such in the pre-construction period. And we would want the VCBB to consider the facts that we've presented and the proposal that we've presented for creating a remedy for the situation, which is, in a nutshell, that we will be held up if there is, and so will other CUDs, if there is no make-ready funding allowed in the pre-construction period.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like not to take up this discussion right now. We very much appreciate your feedback and your writing us. We will follow up later on this, but at this point today, the focus of the agenda is on the construction grant program RFP, and as well as the VCB, the outside plant requirements, which relate to the construction RFP.
And I will send over to Todd to execute the grant agreement now. It's up to you whether to sign, whether you want to sign now or not, but at least start that process.
Okay, great, Rob. Thank you. All right, Christine, do you want to tee up? If we can start with the construction grant program RFP.
Now let's make it, you want to vote, you had a suggestion to change the agenda. You need a motion and a second on that.
I move that we eliminate any items that are not item number 3 and 4.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Clarification,
Opposed?
does that mean are you going to include VCUDA comments and public input as well? No?
This is a special meeting specifically. This is a special meeting specifically for the RFP.
Okay,
I thought we
No
were really,
public comments.
I thought we were really clear about that at the last meeting.
okay.
All right, excellent. All right.
Okay.
Christine, do you want to tee us up?
Sure. I assume you've all got a copy of the RFP. If you want, we'll go through it section by section. We'll skip definitions, but the first thing we come to is Vermont Community Broadband Board outside plant requirements. Would you like to discuss that now or later?
Yeah, yes.
Would you like me to share the screen so the RFP is on the big screen for everybody?
That would
Sure.
be great, Rob.
Okay, let me do that.
So anyway, we met. Anyway, you assigned a subcommittee to review these. That subcommittee was Dan Nelson and Brian Otley and myself. We reviewed these, and what you have in your packet is what we're proposing to the board.
Okay,
This is on-
do you have it on in 2 places?
No, I don't.
I think it was resolved. Someone just muted themselves.
Okay.
So it's on page 4, and that's the percentages, correct? It's on page 4 of the RFP.
I'm sorry, page 4 of the RFP. I thought we were doing the outside plant requirements.
Oh,
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I want to make sure I'm in the right spot.
Yeah, and there's,
Page 4 is the one pager on outside plant, which is where we segued off the section of the RFP. That was page 7 on the PDF.
And it's also it's page 20 of the RFP. So that's what I have up on the screen right now, just to stay within the same document.
Okay,
Yeah.
move to page 20 of the RFP. There we go.
So we're looking at outside plant design requirements?
Yes, it's on the
Okay.
last page of the RFP.
I have to do
Okay.
that before you do the RFP.
All right, so the first one, we talked extensively about fiber sparing. And ultimately what we came up with is it's going to end up being a minimum 48 count all the way to the splitter. So as you know, to get to any fiber run that you have to right down to a neighborhood needs to have a minimum of 3 tubes of spare fiber. That'd be 36, because we talk in tubes, we don't talk in fibers, because typically,
Yeah.
they work in tubes.
So I do have a question on this. And I'm not going to be your technical person. This is information only. I was recently at a community meeting where Touch and Telephone said that it could not distribute fiber to the areas of Tottenham and Corinth because its DSL system was working off of 1 tube. This reserves 3 additional tubes, but you're also planning for the future for mobile, emergency, other potential carriers. I'm just asking, because it's such a baseline question, are we confident that what we're doing here is giving the CUDs a baseline requirement that's big enough under their control?
Yeah, let me,
1 tube.
first of all, a tube, there's no reason you can't use fibers inside a tube. We talk tube
I-
sizes
I
because,
got that.
so I'm not sure how valid
That point
that
was.
point was.
Okay.
So if we talk fibers, we're talking about 36 additional fiber, which should be plenty for growth. That's,
Have we tested that against any forward-looking standard?
Yeah, and Dan looked at it and he thought it made a lot of sense. And, you know, I defer to his technical judgment on that, but it sounds to me like if this is going to be the standard across all roadways, like it's pretty good.
Pretty good standard. Okay. Thank you.
Just to make one thing clear, this applies to anybody asking for grant funding, not just the CUDs. So-
Yeah.
Very good.
yeah, that's right. Okay, we use the right words. We use grantee here. So that was one of the key items that we discussed. But as far as the other thing, you know, what we expect part of the design is when people come back with a construction budget, they're planning what is called optical extents, which is how much budget do you have for the light? You know, how much, and this really gets to some of the good design and construction practices. And power supply and backup requirements for active location. There's actually a whole spec that goes with that.
So this is another kind of question with a similar result. I am a little bit concerned that we're not in the budget for optical and measured loss. You're that far, aren't you?
Yeah, it's optical extents, the second bullet under the first. First major bullet.
Grantee's design deliverables must include detailed planned optical measured loss. Are you there?
Second sub-bullet of the first optical extent.
Oh, budget.
Yes.
Okay, I'll wait till you get to the third big bullet. I asked my question, sorry.
Okay. All right, so the first major bullet, any other questions or?
Yeah, I'm gonna just say exactly what Holly said. I'm not a fiber technician, so I'm gonna rely on you guys to nail this.
Yeah, and so Dan and I did a review. Dan's stronger in this than I am. Dan was comfortable. I was comfortable with Dan's comfort. My question is, have we gotten feedback from potential grant applicants on this stuff, or are they seeing this, or will they be seeing this for the first time when they get the RFP?
No, they've seen this.
Okay. And have we gotten
Yeah, exactly.
productive feedback on it?
Rob, have you received any feedback on this?
We received a little bit of feedback. related to the the second major bullet point number 2, drop distance and route for every demand point should be known, so the impact to the material requirements and optical budget is understood, that might not be known at this time when applying. There was some concern over that. The other feedback we got was just that we should do numbers and letters as opposed to just bullets, so it's easier to describe what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, right.
That would be really useful. But I do have another question regarding power supply and backup requirements for active locations, if I may.
Absolutely.
Okay, I know the FCC is a standard
Yeah,
of 8 hours. Shouldn't we reference a minimum? And throughout this document, I'm worried about setting standards and numbers, maybe using IEEE or other known references rather than a route. This is kind of a subjective power supply and backup requirements for active locations is not a standard in my world, even though I'm not technical.
Yeah, we do have a standard. I'd be glad to refer to it. It's an FCC standard.
Shouldn't it appear here?
Yeah, I actually thought I had some, I don't know how I got lost.
So throughout this document, that's going to be my point of reference is, are we setting benchmark standards as the law requires us to do, not directional
Yes,
suggestions?
this is based on an FCC standard.
Okay.
I'm not sure
Well,
how
it
it
needs
got
to be
lost.
rewritten to be
So
specific.
I'll make sure to include the FCC standard.
Okay. And then the question becomes, in an environment like Vermont, what we're really setting everybody up for, I learned this from others recently, is the carriers or CEDs are going to have to carry backup batteries that consumers can buy. And your initial battery pack is only 8 hours. But this is probably I don't know what active locations means. So is it that the nodes, what are we talking about?
That's any location that requires power. In the case of a GPON design,
everywhere.
It's a hub. And
Okay,
yes, it'll go.
So it doesn't say at the hub, and it should.
Well, I can include that, but I think it's better to say active locations, wherever power is required.
Well, is your requirement at the hub the same as your requirement at the house?
I didn't assume we were putting in requirements for the house here. So I'll call that an excellent point.
But yikes.
I wasn't even thinking of the house. I don't think any of us thought about the house.
Well, the FCC standard does deal with the house or the individual consumer premises.
Okay.
But I wonder whether we should be looking outside of our own individual knowledge at what best practices are for the hub. For example,
Yeah, the FCC, we do have, the FCC has a requirement for the hub.
is that good enough for us?
Well, it requires 24-hour, it requires battery backup and a generator.
So basically, to break this down to layperson terminology.
Basically, you don't lose power.
So the internet availability, high-speed internet availability is constant upstream from a person's house. If something happens at the house, that's the person's issue?
That's the person's issue.
Yeah, although the carrier has to provide an 8-hour battery supply.
Is that only when it's,
Like voluntary, shouldn't it be the household's option to purchase a battery?
I thought it was only if that was their only voice channel also. If
I
they
don't
have
believe so,
copper
but
coming
not,
in and fiber, then copper solves for that.
the copper's going away.
By definition, we call these
In some-
outside
in some
plant requirements.
instances, yes, in some instances it's not.
Well, eventually it is,
Yeah, but I think that would be the retail provider's issue when they pull the
to
copper,
have the balance, yeah.
when they pull the copper.
So admittedly, I didn't come prepared today to go into depth on each of those things, but to say, we need to know what our standard is for the network, and we need to know what it is to the hub, and from the hub to the premises,
And at the premise.
and we have to have specific requirements because people are building design and construction plans off of these things.
Yeah, this was specifically outside plant requirements.
Yeah, and
Okay,
one thing to throw
so
out there
outside the
as,
premises,
Yeah.
fine, okay.
so
And we do-
as
and we
CUDs
do-
do
How
in
do
the,
you, how
we
do
do-
you then
we do
direct
have-
people for the rest of the construction and the costs?
Say, repeat your question.
I'm a little concerned, like, how do our CUDs know what their point of demarcation is cost-wise? And how will we be judging our construction grants? Will we be doing construction grants to the point of demarcation outside the premises?
That's an excellent question.
Well, it's what they're designing to, right?
Well, I didn't think so. I thought that some of our CUDs were suggesting that they were doing drops and installs as part of their construction cost. And frankly, for a point of affordability, that's a pretty important piece. I think we should at least make a parking lot note or something about what are we doing
At the premise.
at the premises.
Yeah, that's,
I mean, to me, once you get to the premises, the homeowner chooses how much add-on service that they want. If they want to have
But it doesn't-
24-hour,
Yeah.
if they want to have 24-hour backup power with a battery, it's their purchase decision.
Yeah,
They
but
can
if-
choose it or
if
not.
If fiber is the only connectivity to the home, recently, the retail provider who owns that, who's delivering that service has to provide an 8-hour, basically,
Yeah, that's the law.
router life so that it's a 911 thing, so that you can reach 911 during a power outage from that location. If there's also copper will solve for voice, done. Doesn't put that
Okay.
requirement on the fiber if it's only fiber. So VTEL, for example, ripped their copper, replaced with fiber. So they provide an 8-hour router backup to solve for this. And then the customer can elect to add beyond 8 hours.
And the customer
Okay.
has to manage that battery life.
By, what do you mean by that?
Batteries die,
Yeah,
you need to charge it
Okay.
or replace it.
so that's, I think we gotta,
It's a hybrid.
yeah, it's a
And it's a
good
very
issue.
different model than before.
It's a good issue. You know, I would see it as in the RFP, asking them for specifics on the questions Holly's asking. Whether they're requirements for funding or not, I think we've got to have more discussion, but we at least need to have the picture of what they're doing, of what they're
Yeah,
designing
at
to,
least.
so that we get the picture.
and if they're
I think
offering
any
a
of
VoIP
these
service,
projects that is going to include a rip and replace of copper, like that has to be in the application. We have to know that. You know, if it's just adding fiber and leaving copper, that's one scenario. If they're ripping copper and replacing fiber, I think we need to have that distinction clarified and illustrated.
But it's an FCC standard to not leave the homeowner without some access point channel, communication channel outside the house.
I think it's a 911 standard. If you.
But
only have-
it is in the FCC regs
Is it?
too.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, they collaborated.
It's that overlap between 911 and fiber.
Okay, whatever that standard is, we should just add that into this RFP.
yeah, and I'm not aware of any CUD at this point who is talking about becoming the provider of last resort. However,
We should ask that. We
but
should just ask.
that's not, but I think that may be coming. So I think
Yeah,
your
we should
point,
just
your
ask it,
point is
so-
well taken.
Well, and
No,
the statute in its intent and fact reports in this first section says that the CUDs are, it doesn't use the word de facto, but it's a word like that. It's CUDs are the de facto provider of last resort.
For
So-
broadband. So,
Yes, but broadband is replacing copper.
yeah, but there's a difference between being a provider of last resort for broadband and being a provider of last resort.
I don't want to get into, the regulatory structure of it all, but you have to, I think if we're not going to be deemed foolish, if we're using big money to plan for the future, we have to anticipate this transition, which is happening across the country.
All right, is there anything else?
So that's a note on that one.
Yep, got it.
So this, and just to be clear, the standard of power supply and backup requirements for active locations means hub, and it means that you're going to insert the FCC standard.
Any place that requires power, yep. This includes the hub.
Okay. Speeding along, sorry.
So the next bullet, this is where Rob brought up one of the points from one of the CDs. So the intent here of this second major bullet is that the design be complete. This has come up several times from the CUDs, and I'm not sure there's an understanding of what the design being complete means. But I think there's an expectation from this board anyway, that when we come in with a construction grant, the design is complete.
Even if it's not their whole territory, it's just for whatever bite they're taking
Right.
in that, okay.
Yeah.
And part of that, Christine, if I'm remembering correctly, is that we're expecting that they not only have a business plan, but that they have a high-level design and a detailed design. And that the detailed design would address every location as defined in the law.
In that application.
In that application, in that territory.
Yep, whatever bite they're taking with that.
Right,
that
right.
shit, yeah.
And so I can appreciate that today, sitting here, if somebody wants to complete a construction application, they can't do it. Because first they have to go out and spend their pre-construction grant money and get some of that detailed information. But isn't that the whole reason why we're doing construction grants in a second step?
And also, to be sure when we're rolling out construction dollars, that they have an architectural framework of this is how they're going to build their house, this is how they're going to build their project. So we have something to look to. The worst thing that I think, in my opinion, that we could do is roll out money in the construction plan without any sort of specificity in design as to how they're going to build whatever they're going to build. They got to have a high level design and that detailed design before we start rolling out construction dollars.
So
Any-
let's get
any
into
disagreement?
a fine line there.
Okay.
Does our collective, because I'm on board with that too, does our collective opinion on that change how we feel about make-ready expenditures in the construction phase as opposed to in the pre-construction phase?
It does not change it, in my opinion.
It doesn't for me. I'm
Okay, just
open
checking.
to have my mind changed, but it doesn't for me. And I've yet to see the timeline that makes somebody disadvantaged because they don't have make-ready costs in the pre-construction. I know if we.
I don't want to go
Yeah.
to a new policy discussion on that, but I just wanted to make sure if we're saying,
Mhm.
no, you have to have that detailed design, is there anything about make-ready that's impacting getting the detailed design in hand?
Not from a design standpoint, no.
Okay.
And I have not heard that, no one has articulated that if you don't allow us to do the make ready, that we're going to not be able to do the high level design. Those dots have
Or
not been
detailed
connected.
design,
I'm sorry, detailed design. Those dots have not been connected in any way that I think I've seen. And I've used this metaphor with Christine. It's like designing a house or building a house. The first thing you do is you plan for it. This is the type of house I'm going to build. I have a general framework of it's 2-story, 1 floor. Is it on a foundation? Is it a slab? You have a general framework of what they're doing. And then you go build your house, and that's when the construction dollars flow.
So is it in the RFP that we should state, in fact, that approval of a construction grant requires a business plan and a detailed design?
I think we included that, didn't we, Rob?
It is in the RFP.
Okay, I just
Some
didn't remember.
reference to that
Okay,
is in the
great. Okay, thanks.
One other thing to put out there is, again, the RFP applies both to CUDs and non-CUD entities. So we may have to figure out what the equivalent is of the business plan before moving forward for other eligible applicant.
Right, and I just want to remind us, this is like an accountability check for at least from my mind, is as we are doling out funds, we're doling it out based on somebody has got a good plan in place to build their project. It's an accountability aspect.
Technically, financially, operationally.
Exactly,
All those.
exactly.
So we are okay with point number 2, which has an inverse relationship with point number 3, really.
Any vote more on point number 2? I'll go to point number 3.
Can you specify which one you're speaking of, or should I renumber this now on the screen?
It's the third major bullet now we're on.
Third major.
No, the
So-
third bullet of the second major bullet.
Oh, there, boy.
Numbering will definitely help.
Yeah.
Here, I'm
Second
gonna
bullet,
do something
say it
interesting.
again, where are we?
We are in the third bullet of the second major bullet.
So identification of Slack budgets and loop.
Select budgets and loop.
Identification of, we just haven't addressed it.
Okay.
Identification of Slack budgets. Do we have any standard for them to address on Slack budgets? Is 3 feet enough? Is it,
It's gonna vary by feeder, depending on the feeder, but yeah, there are.
should it be 10%?
I don't think there are standards out there on this one.
Do we leave it to them to post and layout?
Well, I don't know. Slack budgets can screw up your network like crazy, so I guess we just
Yeah.
need to see an engineer sign
Yeah,
off
part
on the
of-
design.
Yeah, part of your Slack budget
Oh,
needs
gosh.
to take into consideration pole distance, because SAG needs to be accounted for. So we just need to make sure that we review this. This is, Rob and I talked, this is where we need it. You know, when we get to approving the budget, we'll have in there a fiber optic engineer that can go through these in detail and say, is this a reasonable Slack budget based on the design that exists?
Well, shouldn't they present us with an application that has an engineer's sign off on the
Yes.
Slack
Oh, yeah.
budget?
Yep.
Okay.
That's a good point, though, by the way.
I
Repeat what you
don't
just
know
said.
why they would submit it with, I mean,
So- and-
unless it isn't accounted for in the pre-construction money to have that engineer.
The reason I say that's another excellent point is because, Rob, I don't think we talked about engineer sign off, did we?
I don't believe it was included in there, so.
I don't know why our engineer should be, I mean, a check, yes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Not to sign off.
Not the
but
sign
not the
off.
sign off. We need a licensed engineer to
Yep.
say, yeah, this,
This meets
This
basic
works.
requirement, exactly, this works.
That's why I caught it. It's not, doesn't apply here, but we don't think we caught that. So, thank you.
yeah, no.
Okay. Any more comments on the identification of select budgets and loop locations? So we'll have an engineer signing off on. Okay, third major bullet. The grantee's design requirements must include the detailed planning optical loss calculation. These planned losses will be compared to actual during construction to ensure they follow with the optical expense budget. That was a very important item. During our design workshop, there was a lot of consternation over this, but this is, I think we, as we talked about this is called good design planning. You design for a certain loss budget, and when you're doing your actual test, and you start seeing yourself deviate from that, it causes you to investigate. So we believe that this is important and we should keep in there.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a similar kind of question, if I may.
So
Should we be suggesting a margin or a
Yes,
minimum loss?
there is a spec on this one.
There is a spec,
Yeah.
and it should be stated here.
Yep. Any other thoughts or concerns on major bullet number 3? Moving to major bullet number 4, grantees' detailed splice diagrams must be geospatially accurate, provide estimated measured loss at every connection point, so the network performance can be assured and documented. Seems like mother and apple pie on that. But just says that wherever you test, you've got it on a shape file, you've got the data in the attribute fields.
And that should just be a byproduct of the detailed design, right?
Yep,
What does it mean though to be geospatially accurate? Like the splice diagrams have to be specified on a map.
yeah, it has to be in a shape file. Problem with this is, I've seen.
Well, does geospatially accurate say to the world a shape file? That's,
I think it gives some flexibility, but the expectation would be it's going to be in a GIS readable format.
don't we want to set a uniform standard so all these maps can be
Yeah, we do.
integrated?
We
and
actually, the last bullet says that.
the last bullet on here.
Major bullet. Grantee must provide the focus for all design.
So let's take the wiggle room out of the budget, out of the bullet we're working on.
Okay,
Or when we just say, when these are numbered, be consistent with bullet X.
bullet X, yeah. No problem. Any other questions on splice diagrams and geospatially accurate? No. So this next major bullet has caused some consternation because I guess I don't see any problem with it. It said grantee must propose integration locations for geographic redundancy, connection with adjacent CDs, and connection with private networks. Feedback we've received is, well, how do we know that when we haven't seen the other networks? My answer to that would be, this is a proposed connection point. Where would it be best to connect with the other CUD? They can see the other.
So the private network essentially has to get to that point if they want to connect.
Right, yeah.
You're just making a place for it.
The place for it, right.
That's okay with me. I don't know what geographic redundancy is supposed to mean in this context because isn't that an overlap with the other two bullets?
Well, it is, but the reason I'm being clear on geographic redundancy is I've seen it in the past, and this may be just an age problem, but it's been common in the past where you scratch your head when someone says, "Oh, I gave you redundancy because I gave you 4 fibers." But 4 fibers running the same route is not geographic redundancy. Geographic redundancy means ideally you've got a supplier from the east and the west, not both from the west. Because if you get a problem on the east and it fails, or a problem on the west and it fails, and you've got all your feeds from the west, you lose your network.
Okay, well, if this is a big issue, and I don't know if it is, you need to define it as something more specific than geographic redundancy, which means something to you, but may not mean anything.
Right, whether that's like a standard of a minimum of 2 backfeed locations. I'm thinking of the electric world. Like if this line goes down here, I can backfeed my locations from the other direction.
Yeah, except you remember in the electric world, we don't have redundancy with all of our feeds.
Yeah, but whatever the language would fit,
Yeah.
fiber,
Yeah.
minimum of 2, 3 redundancies.
Well, I
I
don't
don't know
know
what
if
the
we-
technical standard in the world is.
Agreed, ditto.
There is no standard for this, and I don't think we want to define it, because if we define it, if you said to all the CUDs right now that you've got to have 2 feed points for all of your fiber lines, they're not going to be able to do it.
If you can't define it, you can't put it in this
Exactly.
document.
But I can define geographic redundancy. But if you're going to do redundancy, you need to make sure it's geographically redundant.
So somehow, I think what we're saying is you gotta somehow put more words in here to frame out what this means, because I don't understand.
The ultimate goal is to get to backfeed.
If they can't design to what you're asking for here, it's just noise.
Yeah, I
If
get
you
it.
can
I get
define it in a way that they can design to it, then
Yep.
we should be aligned.
it. I agree.
Everybody,
Now,
Laura just joined, by the way.
Hi, Laura. All right, got your point on that one. I will do that.
Now, I do have a little question for my fellow board members. This question about integration locations made me focus on the fact that we're spending public money on a fiber network. And shouldn't we ensure, and I don't know if this is the right place to put it, it's kind of like designate, should there be a place where public institutions, libraries, town halls, and so on, have specific access to this network. And I'm just putting this in layman's language, but it would be a shame if the network ends up far from, or if there's additional resource or capacity needed by a town hall and they're at the end of the line, so they can't get the bandwidth that they need. I'm just thinking about, this is public money, those are public institutions. How do we ensure that this network is going to serve those public institutions?
Isn't that defined by if they're unserved or underserved?
It could, but is there anything in this network design that is needed to ensure that the capacity serving those institutions is robust? I'm just asking, I have no idea. Yes, they should be served, but should they be served at the same level as any premises? Or should it be closer to a hub, or what?
I mean, with the spare capacity, that's in the requirement, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a problem?
It should not be a problem. That's where I'm good. That's when I was listening to say, just because ultimately you should be able to give them one good gig access with.
So if they want greater than 100, they can get greater than 100.
If they want multiple feeds for
Right.
some purpose,
Yep.
if the fire department next to the town hall needs its own line, whatever it is,
Yep.
they can get it.
Yep.
Just want to be sure that we're tipping our hat to the public nature of this service.
I mean, universal service plan with a design spare capacity, right? So,
Okay, I'm good.
yeah. And if someone's gonna put in a high capacity computing center somewhere in rural Vermont, yes, I'm thankful for that. And I'm sure we would invest in infrastructure additionally if they needed it beyond whatever's here. But this is very reasonable.
Okay.
So Laura has her hand up, by the way.
Thank you, Rob. Laura?
Hi, I apologize for joining late and intermittently. Are we on the RFP?
Yes.
Yeah, we're on
Okay.
the last page, page 20.
No, we're not on the RFP. We're on the the plant design.
Outside
standards.
plant requirement.
Which is part of the
Which is
RFP.
page 20, the last page of the RFP.
Okay, just wanted to chime in related to the public buildings question. I mean, the CUDs themselves are public bodies created by public entities. I'm not sure if I'm missing the question, Holly.
No, and we're talking about detailed design requirements, and I'm just asking the people who created this this roster of standards, have they
Got it.
considered any extra detailed design criteria that are necessary to serve public buildings? That's all.
Got it. Thank
The
you.
answer I have is this is sufficient.
I would tend to agree. I mean, that we're building a fiber network, and it's really the equipment in the buildings that would be.
You may have
Anyway,
more
thank you.
technical, the difference might be you may have more technical expertise than I do.
All set. Thank you.
Okay,
All right, next up, Christine.
okay, last bullet. The last major bullet, grantee must provide, before construction begins, all design mapping deliverables in a single ESRI format, ESRI preferred format, including engineering data, construction maps, bill of materials linked to location, and as-built are going to be reported quarterly, I should say. That's what we said last meeting. That monthly should change to quarterly. So this should not be a problem after a
Does
detailed.
this meet the standard that the transportation department showed us?
No,
Is that what we're going for or not?
I would say it would be premature to make that decision right now.
How can you make it later?
Well, the problem is that assumes you're getting updated weekly.
Well, I don't want to make a whole separate business out of reporting.
Yeah, right.
So we're trying to strike the balance between what's helpful for tracking versus what's a nuisance for reporting from the CUDs, right? We don't want to be a nuisance, but we also want to see progress and get early warning on any potential delays.
Is there any way that we can add what's been paid for in this scenario? Like, you know, like this, like the design is funded, or, you know, funds have transferred for this, or, you know, like, so that every location says what's funded and what's just open design still? Is there a need for that, just for administrative purposes, even for you guys?
Well, let me see if I interpret what you're saying right.
You said for each location, do you mean CUD or do you mean?
Okay, so grantee must provide before construction begins, which, by the way, your sentence structure might benefit from before construction begins, grantee must provide
Oh, yeah.
all design mapping, that's true in every sentence, begins all design mapping deliverables in a single GIS format, including online and digital field engineering, download detailed construction maps, bill of materials linked to location. And so that's where I was going for, you know, some sort of indication whether the construction, if you're going to do as-built reported, is the as-built linked to location also? And then, like, I was just looking for that next step of, and funding has been approved, or funding has been delivered, or, you know.
Well, that's where I thought you were headed, and I think I want to follow that train of thought because I think it's a good one. Ultimately, if I'm a customer, right, I want to know when I'm going to get my service. So really, what I know that at least one of the CUDs is designing a reporting system so that people can go to their address and get those questions answered. So
Bully for them. I'm just looking for what do we do?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, what do we want? We know it's capable.
We need basic project reporting, right? Which is.
So
Yeah, which is phase.
Yeah, we should be okay.
Phase, schedule, you know, original schedule, current schedule, original budget, current budget, variances. And the only question in my mind is like, weekly's way too often, monthly. I don't know, I wouldn't want anything less than quarterly. So somewhere between monthly and quarterly is probably the magic number. And we don't want to be a nuisance to the CUDs, but at the same time, we want to have visibility to the progress. So.
And I'm just going the next step and saying, okay, I've got an as-built. That should assume that grant money was delivered, right? Where in that planning does it show what we authorized for funding?
You say delivered, do you mean from the board to the CUD or the CUD to the suppliers they're using to do the?
Good question, but I was really thinking from the, you know, and after the day that the grant application is approved and signed off and put into a drawer, there's going to be administration of all of this. And it seems to me it would be so useful to you to be able to click through this information and say, oh yeah, that was part of this grant, or even put as a bullet point, what grant number applied to that location, so that you don't lose over time the ability to say, oh yeah, that was part of this grant. That was, you know, or my delivery comment was, yeah, the board authorized the funding for that, or they did this on their own nickel, or what, you know?
Christine, are you envisioning that you will send out reports for this to say, okay, every quarter, whatever the time frame turns out to be, you populate this data and report it back to the staff quarterly?
yes,
To give them the templates to populate this.
yes.
And that way we can keep track of this grant issuance, that dollar pot, how much you've spent.
But you want to put a data element on the list for that, is my opinion.
As
This is,
Bill
not that the CUD has to do it.
reports quarterly, some reference to a report that you will create.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm not saying that very articulately for wording, but
Yeah, but it's tied to a grant or a payment or something.
What you're talking about is really standard project management reporting.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily an outside plant design element.
No,
But it seems to me to fall into, they can't provide it before construction begins, for sure, but they have to be willing to report. Like you can't, before construction begins, you also can't report as-built.
right.
Right? So you might want to take as-built, and I think all of this is not before construction begins.
That's right, of course not.
Come out of outside plan and go into the RFP body
Yeah.
about grant reporting requirements, right?
Grant reporting requirements.
That's what you're
Thank
saying.
you.
That's what you're saying.
Okay.
It's-
I'm talking about an element called money in my mind, and the fact that this isn't really a pre-construction element.
I think you nailed it. What we're looking for a section that is on grant reporting requirements. And it'll be we want to tell the CUDs what their requirement is, but that's a different requirement than what staff has. Staff has a, but
That's right,
that's a subset of it.
but you want those two things to agree.
Got it.
Great.
So one other question that came up is just defining the bill of materials linked to location. What does that mean? In this respect,
Well,
also,
I
Roger
read that
Nishi has his
email,
hand up.
Rob. I think that gets to this whole issue around design deliverables. Our expectation is a universal service plan. Let me just say this. I'm saying this out to the board for feedback. So I'm going to make the statement and then you provide feedback. It'd be my expectation that as a result of a detailed design, every single location would have the materials requirement tied to it. We've got a universal service plan, right? So that means we need to know how to connect every location. Now, the question that comes up in this email is, well, wait a second. What if we're not going to serve that location? Is that an unnecessary requirement? So that's the question for the board. Do we expect to have a design that includes drops to every single address, or are we
Every single location.
every single location? Well, a location is an address in my mind.
But not all addresses are locations. Because not all addresses are on the grid.
Oh, yeah, all right, never mind.
Not all addresses are underserved.
Yep, I stand corrected. Location, I'm talking about.
Can use location as defined in Act 71.
Yep.
So, but back to the question about, so it does say location, and it means in Act 71. So the question is, can we do it? What is the question, Rob? Can we do it, or is this a good idea, or what?
Both.
Yeah, so here's where I think the question comes from, and I guess I don't understand how you could do it any other way. Question comes is well, there are some CUD folks who talk to says, well, we're only going to design for the people who want service. But if you only do that, then you don't design for anybody initially, right?
How do you know?
How do you know, right? So you really have to design for every location.
When you say design, you mean the design at the drop?
At the drop.
At the drop, so roadside at that location.
Yeah,
And you don't know whether they're gonna take service or not,
Right,
right? But your design's gonna include, you're gonna do whatever you need to do to prepare for that customer taking service so that you're not having to redo any construction in the event that they do. But you're not gonna do everything you need to do to connect them to service before you know whether they're gonna take it or not. So there will be cost incurred after the decision to take service has been made.
Right.
But there's gonna be cost incurred before that decision to prepare for the event that it might.
Well said.
Yeah.
And we had some commentary, I think it was Central Vermont, but forgive me because I don't really remember who. But they said, well, we're gonna go right out to the periphery, to those people who don't have service. And we're gonna pass some people along the way. And we wouldn't want to see that detailed design be only for those, if they have a peripheral service. It would be mind-boggling to figure out who wanted service on the way to the periphery, right?
Especially if they're not underserved already.
And so let's be really, and that's why I'm saying this,
Yeah.
let's be really clear. So I'm on my way to the underserved on the periphery. Am I going to plan in my detailed design a drop for every location? Am I going to plan a drop for, and that would be every unserved location?
Every unserved.
I mean, a location is unserved.
Yeah, because if you're going by served locations, especially served by fiber, you are by
Yeah, it's
definition
done.
overbuilding
Exactly.
to get, which
Right.
means.
Unless it's incidental.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're just kind of hightailing it down that way to get to the endpoint.
You know what, I have to say that I just looked up the definition of location at Act 71, and it doesn't say unserved or underserved. It just says location means an E911 business or residential address connected to the electric power
Yeah,
grid.
the location's a location, and then there's another designation as to whether it's served or underserved.
So our standard for detailed design will be locations that are un or underserved. That you should have capacity in your design for un and underserved along the way.
Right. Absolutely. That's what
You
they're.
shouldn't pass an un and underserved location without preparing for them to take service from you. I think that's correct, right?
I think that's what that's what I'm saying. I think that's what you're saying, but it may not be what the CUDs are planning to do in their detailed design.
Yeah, unless they knew that someone else is gonna go connect those locations before or better, and that they would then become bypass locations overbuilt, because they're going by them to get to somewhere else. But
So we have
I think
to-
it's very unlikely.
So we have to judge against two standards, though. One is, are you overbuilding
Yep.
in your budget?
Why?
And why?
Yep.
Or are you not addressing un and underserved locations on the way to the place that you really want to serve?
And why?
And why?
Yeah, so if we see a design that goes by unserved locations without a design that prepares to connect, we should have the natural question, can you explain why that is?
And staff is going to be on that, I assume. Rob had some questions.
I just wanted to point out that Roger Nishi does have his hand up. I don't know if the board wants to entertain a comment from an eligible provider or to wait, but I wanted to point that out.
So this is a good question. If we open it up all the way along.
I think feedback on the commentary we're making is probably helpful, but, you know,
Yeah, or we can
anybody who's
ask
got
them
that
to- or we can ask
stamina.
them to submit it after, you know, like,
Mhm.
Roger's got credibility with me, so I always want to hear his comments.
All right, let's allow it. We'll limit feedback on issues to some time certain. Let's say,
1 minute.
yeah, 1 minute is fine. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that it might be helpful to hold a workshop with the various engineering firms and those have built networks just to see if there's some agreement with everything you're discussing here, since they're actually been involved with building networks prior. Some of the items that have been discussed today, the group may or may not agree with. I'll give you the example on the drops. When we plan our networks, we're planning to basically serve everyone based on who we see on the maps. But we don't go out and do all the distances on the drops. It's generally, you'll take a look and you'll say, okay, there's going to be so much take rate on the unserved and underserved. And then we estimate what a standard install will be. So a standard install may be 500 or 600 feet of aerial drop, and it may be so much pulled through a conduit, but the conduit needs to be in place and it's the customer's responsible for the conduit. So we'll come there's a standard cost that we'll put to this. So you should be able to get good estimates on drops based on the standard cost, because anything above the standard cost is the customer's responsibility, and then estimating what the take rates are. We really don't do any of the specific drop works until after the fact, when we're doing pre-installs and we're actually going out and staking the locations, because otherwise we'd have to do each and every location. So that's just one suggestion that we could discuss as a group, and it may be helpful in coming up with all the requirements.
Okay, thank you. Is it feasible to hold a workshop? Did you not already do a workshop?
I did a workshop, but I think it's reasonable to hold another one.
So there's a difference between holding a workshop with CUDs and holding a workshop with providers.
Yeah.
Engineering firms.
This was with everybody. That initial
Yeah, I'd be
workshop.
happy.
It was
I think
not with
that's a
only
good suggestion
CUDs.
personally.
To be,
Okay.
okay.
To have a workshop with the engineer, we'll do that.
We
Well-
want to balance it with not holding up the RFP.
Right,
And
right.
these topics weren't covered in that workshop,
Well, this was like pared down significantly from the workshop.
from the workshop?
Yeah, this is what we came up with. So, you know, I don't see any harm in doing an engineering workshop and getting that feedback.
Yeah, did you get feedback from the first one? Like, did that help shape some of this stuff?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So is that going to be helpful? Is it redundant? Do you get the same thing?
Did you have robust participation?
Oh,
from
we had robust
engineering-
participation.
From engineering.
Oh, no,
firms
no, it was more for
and from
CDs.
carriers.
No,
It's more from CUDs.
more for CDs. There's some design folks there. but it
There
was-
was CUD, there was carriers, there was partners of the CUDs, there was consultants of everybody. It was a mix, but I don't see any harm in putting this out for additional feedback, whether it's in writing or an official workshop.
But
But we'd have to move fast.
But then we'd have to move fast, but this is the most important thing that we're doing. So, I would encourage our board to consider whether traditional commercial standards are what we want to apply here. Because when you're talking about average take rate, and you're talking about going back and figuring out who where the drops are gonna be after the fact, you have a once in a lifetime budget here. It's about to get bigger, I hope, to do it robustly. It's already not enough money at $1 billion, but are we gonna err on the side of over engineering or under engineering or standard engineering? What that's actually kind of a policy decision.
And there's something between what Roger said. You know, what I was thinking is that you wouldn't have to go out and physically go to every site. You could do this from a GIS map, come up with an estimate. You know, so he asked one question which was really important for us to address, not today, but maybe later. And it gets to, you know, it was a big debate when I was the executive director of the CUDs. The question is, standard, you know, if the standard is 400 feet of overhead fiber for each customer, well, this gets the affordability issue. What do you do with somebody who's maybe living off, 1,000 feet away on underground? There's an assumption that the providers have based on known practices today. But if we're going for universal service, kind of the question that Holly asked that was going through my head when I wrote this, there's something between just doing an overall budget, doing a detailed plan. Maybe, of course, I don't expect every house to be, somebody to visit every home or every address. Maybe we do. But, that it seems like you could do that from a GIS map.
Well, and then, this gets to the premises requirements. There's also the question of conduit. We want to talk about affordability issues.
Yeah.
It is only incidental information from my standpoint, but by and large, low-income premises require conduit. I don't have a percentage. I can't tell you, but more often than not, it's funny. High income and low income.
It might be
Lots of
something to be said
conduit.
for another grant program to deal with low income that needs conduit, but we
Well,
do,
this-
just for the
this
board knows, there's
organization-
two.
This
There's two,
organization could create that program. It could also ask for legislation for that kind of program. But in any event,
But part of this, it's important discussion right here, because part of the design is for us to know how much is out there.
Right.
You said, and I agree with your intuition, but it's an intuition. When we're doing design,
you need to know.
So there's two other hands up, David Jones and FX Flynn. The board can choose the board can choose who they would like to hear from and who they.
So we allowed one. I think we need to allow for
Okay.
others to participate.
For a minute.
So
Okay, David,
Okay, thank you. I believe it was Rob who just made the comment, or shortly before made the comment, that this RFP needs to get done very quickly. But the other gentleman made the comment that the engineering contents of the RFP are important. And I agree with that. And I would also make the suggestion that the ability of CUDs to come up with a complete engineering design, which is what is apparently going to be required in our submissions in response to this RFP, is going to take some time, and most CUDs have just gotten their pre-construction grants, and in our case, we don't have the money because we're still talking about the pre-construction grant and whether it includes make-ready. So the idea that a fulsome response to this RFP could be produced in a matter of weeks over a holiday period needs to be re-examined. And I believe that the timing of response to this RFP is going to be measured in months, not weeks. And so getting this right would be a good idea. Thank you.
So FX is last, but also David and Ann, your grant agreement has just been routed to you. Submit your invoice.
Okay,
FX.
FX.
Right. Just quickly, I think it's going to make your job a lot easier to stay focused on getting world-class broadband available to every on-grid premises in Vermont, because that's the prerequisite for solving all of the affordability issues. And there's a reason why, utilities have standards, like the 400-foot standard and so forth. And a lot of that has to do with if you try and do it completely, you're looking at a situation where there's like really not enough money in the world. So I think your job will be a lot simpler to be focused on, number one, availability, number two, the standard case. Thank you.
If we were to agree with FX's opinion on that, I think we ought to state it and be clear about it, because we heard from, for example, Maple Broadband, that they were planning to include the drop and to the premises equipment in their construction cost for purposes of affordability. So I think we should decide whether we're just leaving it up to the CUDs or whether we want to build to what has been the commercial standard, and kind of, because otherwise we're going to have some CUDs that have a disproportionate amount of resource because they planned for that that drop.
I mean, we could, here's a suggestion. We could put a minimum standard and leave it to the CUD if they want to include the price tag all the way from the pole to the house, or if they want to just do the minimum standard.
And we've already allocated funds by district, right, overall? So if that means they only get 5 miles built while somebody gets 10 miles built, that's another thing, right? I can live with that.
And so I think that's a separate issue. And so what we're saying here, I'm saying, because you can still do bill of materials linked to location, either, no matter how you do it. But the point you're discussing right now is putting together a minimum standard that all need to meet, but they can exceed that standard.
Yes.
Come and request.
Yes.
And it should say that.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what that minimum standard should be. If it's 400 feet of aerial, I don't know what that should be. I leave that open. Maybe we delegate that to staff to figure out what the right setup is there.
Okay.
Or get feedback from the engineering work group or workshop.
Yeah. Is that just an economic standard? Is that a safety standard? Is that an engineering standard? Where does that come from? Like in the old days when planning regulations, zoning regulations had a standard of 2 feet. Why? Because that's how long ladders were for fire departments. I mean, 2 feet, 2 stories, because that's how long ladders were. I mean, we don't know what the 400-foot thing is.
So there's no other questions on the chat, thankfully.
Okay, thank you.
So we can hit
Okay,
the
so-
RFP.
So my understanding is, Christina and Rob, you're gonna hold a workshop, or you're gonna put out for comment the outside plant
I think we
design,
should put out a comment.
or you could do, I'm gonna leave it to you. That's up to you to get this feedback. I don't wanna micromanage that. That's.
All right, I'll talk with Rob. We'll decide what the
Okay.
best place is. Thank you.
And then with that, I think we are now on to.
And put up for engineering comment.
Engineering
Thank you. All right,
There we go.
all right, we got through that one. So now we're into funding on page 3 of the RFP.
Well, is there anything anybody wants to comment on first? Before we get to, like, well, there's a whole other section here that goes through a lot of definitions. Some of these are right direct from legislation.
Yeah, I skipped those. Yeah,
Are
go
these
ahead.
part of the
Okay,
outdoor
let's-
plant?
Take us through the broadband grant. That's where we are at.
Yes.
You say we're not done with the outdoor plant.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we have some definite,
Okay.
Christine was suggesting
Let's
skipping.
start on
page
page
3.
1 of the RFP draft,
Yes. That's what I'm
so that
saying.
we're all together.
Yeah, I skipped
Okay.
all the definitions,
All
sorry.
right.
Okay, so
So just walk us through some of the stuff that you're saying is required to be in here.
yeah, this is required language from finance and management for any of the ARPA funds.
Okay.
So page 1 is okay, Rob?
Page 1 should be okay. We'll probably want to, we're going to certainly do another proofread of this and welcome any grammatical or other typo corrections. But here we have some definitions. This is from legislation. The only thing I added was this note, since we're getting a lot of questions about actual towns applying, and towns are not eligible applicants, but they can partner with an eligible applicant. So
Okay.
the underserved locations. So we took some definitions directly from the interim final rule for the state fiscal recovery funds. And they only specify as underserved. The wireline connection is a one key thing, and reliably delivers. So that's what we did to align it with ARPA, and it solves some of our mapping challenges. But there's quite the disclaimer there of, but this is taken directly from their FAQ.
So this, Rob, is really in response to the mapping challenge that includes wireless, right?
It's just trying to align with what is in ARPA, but it does address that, and it addresses situations where even cable might not be providing the specific speed. There is a question of how you prove it with that, but I think when it comes to wireless, I think it does fall into the question of whether it reliably delivers the 25.3. That's how it was discussed within ARPA.
So I just am a little bit leery of language that draws heat from other sectors. And the word reliable here is one of those words. That's a subjective standard. And so it might be possible just to say that in this context, for this board, in this grant scenario, we're talking about wireline, and just take out reliable.
Yeah, there is a FCC definition of reliable.
There is?
Yes. 80% of the time, it has to meet the requirements over a period of time. But
If that's what you prefer, to put an 80% standard in?
I think I prefer sticking to wireline. What do you think, Rob?
I'm okay with either. I was just trying to align it with an existing source,
I'm
just to
happy.
keep consistency. That's all.
And we're talking wireline here. Do we mean fiber, or can coaxial cable come back into play?
Well, coaxial cable could come into play for 25.3, but not 100 by 100.
So isn't the standard that we're being held to in the legislation 100 square? So shouldn't we be saying fiber instead of wireline? I mean, a location that only has underserved only has access to, it has access to,
25.3.
yeah,
So it's the
25.3, I got that, but it only has access to a reliable, I mean, this language is a little mind-bending to me. It means a location that only has access to a reliable wireline broadband connection. I mean, what about, are you saying everybody else is underserved? Or
So there's actually,
This is
there's
very-
actually,
I'm not sure if I'm-
I'm seeing a type. Am I on mute here? Sorry. Yeah, there's actually a typo. Underserved should say 25.1. It should be say 25.3, and then unserved is the 4.1. So that is a big typo.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was
I
referring
think at one point we were just going to say everything is underserved. We weren't even breaking it out since it doesn't really matter for the purposes of Act 71. But that is one big change there. But this was just trying to align it with ARPA, and what it says in terms of overbuilding is we can't overbuild anything. Any overbuild of something that achieves 25.3 must be incidental, and we'll get that when we talk about incidental overbuild. So that is kind of why those definitions are there in the footnotes and everything.
But the language, Rob, even if you look at unserved locations, is still mind-bending to me. Means I have an unserved location that only has access to reliable wireline broadband connections capable of less than. What if I don't have, what if I'm on location, I'm on the grid, and I don't have a reliable wireline broadband? I'm excluded in the way this definition is drafted.
Yeah, there's a problem with this. It should be underserved, should be anything that's less than 25.3, not at least 25.3. I think this, with some of the back and forth editing, this got changed. So if you look at Act 71, if someone could pull it up, I'm sharing my screen, so I don't know if I can actually pull it up right now.
Yeah, just
You'll
use
see
the
the
language out of 71.
The only thing that was added in that language was adding the reliable wireline part to make it match with what's in ARPA.
Which really goofed it up. Which really goofs it up.
So there's no way to define reliable, so can we just get rid of that?
Yeah, let's get rid of it.
And it isn't only locations that are served by wireline. An unserved location isn't necessarily served by wireline at all. So I don't understand why that makes it okay under ARPA, but it doesn't work as a definition. So can we just note that we need to change this?
Sure.
When you say wireline doesn't work, are you thinking wireless that has reasonable speed?
Or nothing.
Yeah, it's, if you look
Yeah,
at,
it's,
I'm on the grid, but I have nothing.
yeah, and
There's no communications to your premise
I
whatsoever.
have copper.
Yeah, so
I think you're missing that
Oh, that's
unserved
wireline.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking about it.
But it says only.
only.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
That's the only is the problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But we're all, the statute says if you're 25.3, you're not on the list, right?
anything over
Yeah.
25.3 is
25.3
fine.
Yeah,
and
if
higher.
we're building to 100 square, but if you have 25.3, you're good enough for now.
Thank you.
It seems like it's that simple. I even have a problem with our legislation distinguishing between underserved and unserved, because for our purposes, we're addressing anybody that's 25.3 or less.
Yeah, so
No,
4.1
no,
is,
less than 25.3,
Less than 25.3, yeah.
not 25.3 and
Yeah,
less,
yeah,
it's
no,
less than
less
25.3.
than
That's what we're.
which
supposed to do.
includes all the
Yeah.
4.1 people.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we'll fix the, I
Yeah.
think I understand what the problem is here, but no, that's why we were trying to align it. But yeah, if you have under 25.3, but more than 4.1, you're
I didn't
underserved.
make
If
it.
you have less than 4.1, you're
Oh, it's for your
unserved.
fault.
Sometimes clarity can be confusing, huh?
Sometimes
Those of us that are unclear.
federal language can be confusing.
Okay. Any other questions about unserved? Viable business plan.
The next
The
is
viable business plan, this is something I had a question about in terms of how this applies to other eligible
PowerPoint.
applicants.
Say that again, Rob.
So
Yeah.
the viable business plan, this was something I had a question about. It's in the legislation. how does this apply to other eligible applicants outside of a CUD? What do we need for them to show us and prove to us?
Well, can we kind of break this down a little bit? Can we start with, are the business plans we've received from CUDs meeting this standard? It takes into consideration make-ready work, equipment and materials, and other relevant capital and operational expense. Is that what's in the business plans?
They've been told that they need to update their business plans with that. There is a challenge with the make-ready of not knowing how long it's going to take, but we don't want to go there right now. But they've been told that they need to include all those in their business plans.
Yeah, the business plans I've looked at does include this, but they need to be updated. I think the business plans were pretty thorough, but the problem is they reflect pre-grant funding. We need to update. So we've let all the CUDs know that they need to update their business plan in anticipation of construction grants. In other words, they need an updated business plan in order to qualify for a construction grant.
And really what you want is the cost of make-ready work, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm cool.
Okay. So incidental overbuild was a big one.
Oh, wait a second. We didn't answer your question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Good point.
Well,
Thank you,
point-to-point fiber.
we can go back to viable business.
So we got to answer incidental overbuild.
Yeah.
I mean, no.
So couldn't an eligible provider provide a plan that shows for the subject area, network engineering, the designs, labor needs, availability, supply chain contingencies, cost of make-ready work, and other relevant capital and operational expense?
Okay.
Why not?
That's fine. It's fine with me that we have that as something that they need to provide.
But that would be relevant to the proposed construction area, not to the eligible provider's whole system, right?
It would be to the universal service plan they are proposing. So if it's for one town, it would be for that entire town. If it's for several towns, it would be for those towns.
So I think universal service plan becomes a fraught definition here.
Yeah, we want to go there too.
Because
Need to go up
just
there.
looking at it.
Where is that? Yeah. Universal service plan.
Number 12 on section 8082.
You're in the legislation now?
I am.
Okay.
And what I think you want to do is provide a business plan for the subject construction project that you're applying for, not a business plan for universal service in a communications union district. An eligible provider might not be signing up for the whole communications union district.
That they're signing up for unless we change our definition of a universal service plan, they're signing up for an entire town. So
not necessarily. We disagree on this part, Rob. That's
No, I don't think Rob disagrees. I think this is the question we need the board to answer.
Yeah, the board needs to decide whether we look at wire lines.
So let me give you a worst case example. If you go to Colchester, there's really small pockets. You're talking about 6 or 8 homes. The whole town's pretty well covered, but there's probably 200 locations total. They're all little pockets of 6 and 12. So the question, and so this, I understand I'm talking about the extremes here. So I'm not being overly dramatic. But I find how's a provider going to serve those locations, right? Because if they have to do a whole universal service plan. Now, my answer might be, well, you got the service plan, universal service plan, because you already got everybody covered. And if you're identifying how to address, you're really only going to address those locations that are unserved, but they're about 6 or 8 remote pockets.
So would you say no if I were Waitsfield Valley Telecom and I came to you and said, I have a plan for serving Bolton, the unserved section of Bolton, not on the other side of the mountain, but on my side of the mountain. and you would say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to you because there are unserved locations in Bolton that you aren't addressing. In my mind, that's penny wise and pound foolish, or putting the cart before the horse, or whatever other phrase you want to put it. It's,
We pick up anybody we can.
we honor opportunistically our overarching goal of serving all locations.
I agree with you. I don't think that's where the board had come down previously. I know Laura was
No,
very
that's
clear that it
exactly
had
where
to
we
be.
came down. That's exactly where
Holly,
we came down with regard to, wait a second, with regard to EC Fiber last meeting.
Yeah, it was, and that's where there was a different of a inconsistency with how we were treating Bolton. That was the whole discussion last time, where I felt like we had to come up with we had to have a consistency of how we were treating towns that aren't in CUDs, between how we're treating it for a CUD and how we're treating it for an eligible provider. And at the previous board meeting, we decided that Bolton couldn't be funded unless they had some sort of plan for those 11 addresses, which that was where we have the impression that the board came down, and where we found it challenging, and I know providers found it challenging, and I think why we had Bolton in here for comments last time.
Is because Waitsfield Valley Telecom, Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom is a small communications carrier under the eligible provider definition. And they came in during the pre-construction phase and wanted a grant for Bolton.
No, they didn't come in during the pre-construction phase. This was trying to figure out for construction of what do they need to get funding. And it was the board came back saying that you need to figure out what you're doing for those other addresses, even though they're not in your wire center, even though they're not in your wire center area, even though they're not addresses you serve right now or traditionally would provide service to. You need to reach out to Consolidated or reach out to the neighboring CUD and figure out a plan for those addresses, which in my personal opinion, seemed very challenging to ask a provider to try to connect with another provider to come up with a plan. I guess it's one of the challenges I think you need to address.
I don't know why I'm bothering to raise my hand now, but Madam Chair.
Go, absolutely, go ahead.
I would like us to stick to the definition of viable business plan. And if we need to rework our position on Bolton, we should do that at our next meeting. It's another thing on the agenda. But I think for purposes of viable business plan, that we should be in this RFP accepting viable business plans from eligible providers for the specific grant project. Like you have to show what your business plan is for that.
Yeah, but if it's a
served area.
Agreed. But if the scenario is that the CUD has partnered with a private operator for a section,
Yeah.
the business plan, for me, the only thing I care about the business plan is that there's long-term viability of the operator to deliver the service. And right. So if the CUD for a portion of their universal service plan has a private operator who's going to hit 100 addresses for them in some section, the business plan I want is just that private operator's business plan across their entire network, which is going to be supportive of that and extending it to those 100 locations. Then I'm good, right?
But that business plan that serves their commercial network could be completely different from what their deal is with the CUD.
Yeah, but
These
right,
aren't,
so it's to show that detail. But it's supported by, I'm not looking at what's the business plan for those 100 addresses. I'm looking for what's the business plan of the provider who's going to serve those 100 addresses. And
if it's a partnership with the CUD, you're not just saying, I just want to see the CUD's business plan that includes that partnership.
No, I want to see both, right?
Well, then we're going to have to be really detailed, because I think what we're saying is we've got one scenario for CUDs. We've got another scenario for CUDs with an internet service provider partner.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we have a third scenario with a small communications carrier who's coming in individually without a CUD to make a grant request for construction. Like, are you going to want the whole business plan for them? You want Franklin Telecom to come in and say, this is our business plan, generally speaking, and we're going to just put these guys, the 100 addresses, into that business plan.
I think that business plan is the supporting justification to say we're credible in going after those 100.
Okay,
Don't you think?
That's reasonable.
I think so.
I mean, because they're just extending their business.
Actually, you're convincing me
Yeah,
that that's gonna go
if
that
they
way.
showed that those 100 aren't viable on their own, but because we've had, 30 years of doing this, we can extend ourselves and make it all work in the aggregate.
Well, and just say it the backwards way, if you're losing and you're not if you're losing money and you're not sustainable on your existing business, we don't want to put that additional 100 with you.
Agreed,
Ideal, yeah.
Okay,
agreed.
so the language in the definition then needs to apply to both CUDs, eligible carriers, and any internet service provider that's partnering with
Yeah.
a CUD.
Or even a town. We'll see the town. All right. Sorry.
Just
Back.
one
Take it back.
step too far.
I take it back. Withdrawn.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay. Does that make sense to you, Rod?
I think so. Should we move to an even easier one? What is incidental overbuild?
Oh, you're funny. All right, so you guys are all set.
Yeah, we're all set. We can, Rob and I can figure this out.
Let's move on to incidental overbuild.
And just as background on this, we also referred to existing federal legislation. That's where we got the 20% figure. We included the point-to-point fiber not counting. We did use the reliable wireline wording that they use in the federal legislation. We also used how in ARPA, it's matters of what the project is designed for. Like, it'll be pretty obvious if a project is not designed for the underserved and unserved versus that it's going through a cabled area to get to those.
So Rob, in the footnote, you have a question mark.
Where's the question mark?
And you reference 6/17. I don't know what this means.
Oh, this was directly from the ARPA FAQ. This was a question posed in it, and that's the response. So that's where I was basing that. And then the other one is a section from the new infrastructure bill.
All right, if you're going to include that footnote, listing it as a question mark is odd.
Sure.
If you could rephrase that to a statement versus a question.
I can also, yeah. So
That would
I
be
can also
appropriate
take off all
explanatory
this.
afterward.
Yeah. I could also just take off this text too, or I can say it's from the FAQ. Like, I'm going to say from FAQ, and I'll add more detail of what FAQ and all of that is. But that is very, question marks are confusing in that respect.
So the punchline of this definition is, if you're going through an area and less than 20% of the addresses passed are served, then it's not incidental.
It's out of your whole project, and it's kind of like a baseline. If we look at it and we see that 20% of more than 20% of the addresses, we're going to have real questions of whether that's actually incidental or not. And I know that there's going to be comments saying that anything that doesn't have 100 by 100 should be considered not overbuild, but that's not how the legislation is written right now. So this was trying to provide a little bit of guidance to take into account of discrepancies in the data, of trying to align it with the federal definition, and align it with the fact that as networks are designed, they're going to have to pass through some areas that are cabled to get to non-cabled areas. And an outstanding question, this is one of the questions that we had posed as we familiarized this RFP, was, well, can you do drops off of that? And I leave that for the board to decide. I think if we're passing by anybody, they should have the option. But I think if you're passing through a town and then you're doing all the side roads off of it, well, there's a straight face test.
So this is a question that's actually kind of important. So if I'm building out Woodstock, Vermont, and I can find a way to go through town through, I don't know who's serving Woodstock. I know EC Fiber does, but let's say it's Comcast. And I can find a way to build my numbers so that I can take off, I can go overlap with, I'm serving 100 residences with my project. I can go through and pick up 20 Comcast households on my way. To me, like, you might say it's incidental, but it's only incidental if it was necessary to build to the other 80. Or are you allowing that, as long as it's not more than 20, go for it? Add that overbuild. I think
that is how it was framed in the infrastructure bill, that they're looking at the entire project and number of addresses. How we interpret that and provide that is up to the board.
That's the federal bill looks
yeah,
like
the federal infrastructure says 80% of the locations have to be unserved or underserved locations.
Well, I can imagine some folks being unhappy with it, but it does create a bright line. You know, total number of projects is 100.
Right. The intent of what we're doing is not to pick up profit centers along the way, even though it might help the business plan. The intent is to use that fiber for folks that are unserved or underserved.
And this rule allows you to pick up profit centers.
But only if it happens to be you're going, but you have to go by there.
It does not say that. It doesn't say required routes or whatever. It just says as long as it's 20% or under, go for it.
Yeah, I think the 20% will discourage gaming. Because if you're doing all these loops to pick up little profit centers, at some point you become
not logical.
It doesn't make sense. Exactly. It's not logical to do. There might be a few incidentals that happens, but I think that wording deters grabbing profit. Yeah, designing systems to grab profit that you're eating up that fiber for others. They're already served.
We do have one question from FX Flynn, if the board wants to hear, but I think we might be getting, I don't know.
All right, it is 1:41.
I think we should hear FX's 1 minute comment, okay. And then.
But we got to plow through. We're on page 7 of 24.
Yeah. I liked the comment that was made that doing it right is important, but that's. Yeah, anyway.
Okay, FX.
We will allow FX to 1 minute comment.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. Building, overbuilding cable is not about profit centers. I mean, most of the time we're going to be laying in mainline access cable that allows us to get out into the hinterlands, and the construction guidelines say 48 count cable. So you are going to be providing a substantial fiber build in those areas. I would also point out that that EC Fiber's project, which began in 2008, had vast numbers of unserved people. And that is our project.
No, nobody's questioning the viability of the project. I was just using a name.
No. What I'm saying is that in terms of measuring the percentage of people being, served by our project who are unserved, that's the universe that we'll be pointing to, is our entire district. That is our project.
that was, did you do discern that what he's saying is our district is X number of people. As long as, if you take 20% of that, as long as we don't overbuild more than 20%, we're fine. So, and that's good enough for, okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to be looking at it as on a per application basis, not on a per entire district basis, is how I was envisioning it in terms of how it looks with the funding. But we need to clarify that. We should clarify that, because I want to make sure that we're aligned with ARPA. Like, there is something to be said that anybody that doesn't have 100 by 100 isn't served, but we're working within that universe and within the universe of Act 71, that we have to make sure that our focus is on those unserved and underserved.
So is ARPA pressing you for a project by project view, or for a universal service plan view, or what?
As with everything with ARPA, it's an interim final rule. So what I have is what I pasted in the footnote. So, and I think we're also doing things a little bit differently.
I would say they're looking at a project by project.
Yeah, because that's how it's going to be in most cases. Yeah. Like, we're taking a little bit of a different tact in Vermont here but I would say project by phase by phase, at least.
Yeah. I think you almost have to do it project by project, because if you think about it, let's say you said, okay, I'm a district that has 1,000 un and underserved. So I'm going for a project that's 200 addresses that are already served, and it's not an overbuild because it's 20%, well, 20%, less than 20%. So it'd be 199. But I mean, you could have a whole project that was an overbuild under those circumstances. So just, I know I'm messing with your definition here, but I think we want to give staff the guidance that it's on a 20% on a project by project basis.
I think what do you define as project versus phase?
The application.
Grant application.
So it's phase. There's not two separate definitions of that. I think it's phase by phase.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to ensure that we comply with ARPA requirements. Mm-hmm. That's an underlying.
Yeah, but you guys are going to look at the 20% by grant application or phase.
Yep.
Yeah, and we all will be looking at the applications, and as I said, if it doesn't pass, if we see it and it's very obvious what is happening, we can make our stand.
All right, anything else on incidental overbuild? Let's move along. We already did the outside plant design.
So
we already did that. So we're on
the funding piece. I did an analysis too, because the funding piece, Rob and I have been going around with. But first of all, we didn't put a number in there for funding yet, because we don't know what it is yet. That's going to be part of our budget. But what we're going to do is we're going to allocate by percentage. So the proposal here is that we take percentage. And Rob, I should send this to you. What I did is what Rob and I.
Does Act 71 require us to allocate by some methodology like we did pre-construction, or?
There's I think there's a geographic requirement. I'll look it up right now.
There is a
geographic equity provision. I remember that.
Yeah,
but I don't know if that is.
I thought that was part of pre-construction.
Yeah.
I don't think it was part of pre-construction. There is we want to geographically serve a good portion of the state. One thing to put out there with these percentages is it's the reason we're trying to do this is that in order to come up with the business plan, in order to know what the funding gap is that they need to come from other sources, they need to have an idea of what they're eligible for. This isn't saying that we're writing a check for 8.98% of whatever our entire program is just for Addison, for instance. It's not saying that, just to be clear. What it is giving some degree of certainty in an incredibly uncertain world. We don't know how much more money is coming in from the legislature this year, from the infrastructure bill. Like, there's so many different variables. There's the USDA Reconnect program, but to give some certainty, and they have to plan around this amount of how they're going to find the other money, what their what their expectations are, what their assumptions are in order to do universal service for their district.
So the money is not defined, so that's a variable. We're trying to make a percentage, and we're basing it on unserved road segments.
Well, we're basing it on cable.
Underserved.
So what we're proposing, and this, so Rob, I just sent you this. I sent it to all of you, Kuda. I did this before I came in because this has been, but we've been bouncing around on this. What Rob and I concluded was we think the best way to allocate is by removing the cable areas and then look at the road mileage.
So remedial action for the undercompetent. So cable areas are removed because they provide 25/3.
Because they provide 25/3, so
Right.
the target areas. And you can see there's some big differences here. It looks like, I just finished it 3 minutes ago. This Addison looks a little suspect there. The fact that they have 9% road and 9% cable. But
Christine,
the rest
we
of
also
these,
want to be, can I add one more thing, Christine? This
Yeah.
also subtracts areas where there's no premises. This was a analysis that the
Yeah.
Public Service Department did, which was incredibly helpful, and I am so thankful that they did it.
yeah,
that
we were pleased.
determined on a town-by-town basis and on a CUD basis of what roads were uncabled, had houses, so would contain those addresses. It
Oh,
seemed
yeah, that
fair.
first number
it's-
is right.
And when you say uncable, does that mean unfibered also?
Yes,
Unfibered
uncable or
also, yes.
unfibered, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like the entire VTEL exchange area is not, is excluded.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Great. Yeah, so
So-
cable areas removed, that's like, can we just change the term? Because cable makes me think Comcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, I'll
It's
change it.
basically 25/3 and higher areas.
25/3.
right?
Yeah.
Yep. Consider that done.
And we're satisfied with the way they measured that. That does not include mobile.
Doesn't
Yeah,
include
well,
that.
it's not going to include mobile if it's just the wireline connections. This was a way of avoiding,
Just being sure.
Yeah, actually Addison is correct. Both the road miles and 25/3 and higher removed is the same. So that, and just check that. That's correct.
And the thought is that you have to use, instead of the number of unserved and underserved, you have to use road miles because in some locations, the unserved are distributed so broadly or on so many miles of road, that's where the real cost is.
Yep.
it's a way to account for density.
Yeah.
And that's a big issue when you're talking about, especially up in NEK versus an area that's denser. And these, as I said, this is draft. We want to finalize the numbers, and there is a question of whether we do the same thing for non-cut areas as well, or whether a non-cut area is one allotment, and the projects compete within that. That's a second question. So we do have that data.
So in the draft that went out in the packet, it had a no CUD line item of 14.9%.
Yes, yeah, that's still in here right now. So that's
So-
where,
So that number remains. The no CUD areas still remains 14.9% on all three of these.
Oh, I didn't do those for I was doing this to my CUD. I didn't look at town.
Because my reaction to that number was really big. What do we do with that group?
15%?
Yeah.
14%, yeah.
we can do it on a town-by-town basis, but that is not going to be enough possibly to cover certain towns. I struggled with that question, the non-CUD towns.
So it seems to me that, for example, the extension application that EC Fiber filed at the last minute for the contingent stretches, like that would come out of this 14.9% number,
Mhm.
as opposed to out of the CUD
Oh, yeah, interesting.
allocation.
That's
Yep,
a very interesting question of how to address those scenarios.
Say that
Yeah.
again.
But
So if, let's say, I'm just using the very specific example of EC Fiber, who in their pre-construction grant application last week applied for a segment of another town, not in their district,
Right.
that is contiguous with their network and contiguous with the border, which is allowed for under the statute. So that contiguous portion outside the district could be taken as part of this 14.9%.
So all this said differently, the CUDs could get a little bit more in their percentage bucket if they overlap into these no CUD towns.
Yeah,
They can start
in the
carving
name
out.
of universal service.
Okay, that's how that would get potentially eaten up. They can, there's a money play there for the CUDs. They have a financial interest. They're nearby
Yeah.
to grab those no CUD.
And
towns.
eligible carriers can come for that money. And
Mhm.
CUDs plus partners.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll have to do some adjustments based on, there's different arrangements between CUDs to follow the wire centers to build out. So but I don't think things are going to shift a lot on this. One place where it could shift a little bit is in some towns, they're in more than one CUD. And they're not in more than one CUD just because of wire centers. They're in because they were seeing which plan they wanted to go with. So that could cause some shifting down, especially with Deerfield Valley and Southern Vermont. There's also a pending NTIA application for Southern Vermont that would serve all but I think 14 addresses in Bennington County. So that money would be reallocated if they don't need it. So it will be shifting a little bit, but this is trying to give some type of baseline, since I couldn't come up with another way that was fair to do it, that accounted for both the addresses and density without getting so complicated that we would be here for about 6 weeks just trying to figure out a formula.
So I don't hear that my colleagues have a problem with road miles. It sounds like we're okay doing an allocation, which is like a rebuttable presumption, right? Like this is your allocation unless you come back to the board and you have some reason why you have a cost that's going to put you outside of your allocation. And then we have to figure out how we're going to manage the money. Okay.
So we know the money's not going to cover everything.
And we know the money's not going to cover everything until we get more money, if we do.
Right.
This could be part of our legislative play. And it's also the case that along with these allocations, do these add up to 100?
I hope so.
I didn't, yeah, I hope so. They should.
I'm kind of hoping, well, I don't know, I have a piece of paper here, and I don't know whether 14.9%.
No, it was not.
It's not.
Okay, so everything has to be adjusted for 14.9%.
Yep.
And I think that that's the way that we show our policy of universal services in effect. That we've accommodated for those outside the CUD. Is that all right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on, and maybe tell me to move on to this, but I was expecting that the construction phase would be quasi-competitive, that we wouldn't do an allocation, that we would wait for projects to come in, and we would award them on a per project basis based on the merits and the strengths of the application.
We still are, but this is giving a general idea, and we also don't want to encourage a CUD from going to the least served addresses first that are going to end up being more expensive if we do it on a cost per address basis, for instance.
So this is my sense of this.
Okay.
So you have your allocations out there. We all know that the bucket's limited. So yeah, you live into your allocation, but it's still first come, first serve.
So let's just take an extreme example. You have one CUD that's rocking and rolling and chewing through its allocation, and they get 95% of the way done of eating through their allocation, of wisely and productively spending their allocation. And you've got another CUD that's dragging its feet, and they're 5% of their allocation, and this is 3 years from now.
Yeah.
And the productive CUD says, I can keep going if you give me more funding. Will we take away from the slower CUD to advance the faster one, or will we let those funds just sit and lay dormant until the slower one can continue to limp along?
Board decision, policy would suggest that the allocation is just a presumption.
Like a starting point?
A starting point.
Okay, if that's the way we're thinking about it, that's okay.
Yeah, the last thing we need is to have funds sitting unused.
No, that's what I mean. So
Exactly.
there's something to be said for velocity. confidence.
Right.
The allocation is not binding on the board.
Okay,
That's fair. I like that.
we have to make that
This
very
is-
clear
Yeah,
so that no one's making plans around a guaranteed allocation that's in fact not guaranteed. And no one's ramping down or pacing their plans because they're scared of hitting the end of their budget, when in fact they can get more budget than they've been allocated.
And it also allows the CUDs to say, OMG, I'm only allocated X. I'm into this project and it looks like our detailed design suggests a cost of Y. We're not going to be able to cover this whole project, so they can scale down, or they can fundraise, or whatever.
Whatever they do.
I'm hoping
and
this
the
is for
towns
fundraise
reshuffle the
and for
deck
that.
at that point and join a different CUD.
I think we have the flexibility at that point to
Always.
decide. Always.
By the law.
I think, I'm hoping the CUDs use this to saying we need to find X other funding elsewhere. We need to talk to our senators and representatives that we need this much amount of funding to do our entire district. And by the way, the more grant funding we have, the lower the cost is going to be to the end consumer. But I hope it allows them to identify some gaps and have at least a little bit of certainty with a lot of asterisks next to it to plan around.
As long as the towns can shuffle the deck and say, okay, if I joined up with this CUD, they didn't get to me in a couple years, and this other CUD is rocking and rolling, I can jump ship and go to this other CUD, and I think this works, the way we've laid it out.
I think you'd have to say though, Patty, just to, put it out there in the world of towns. If you're not part of a CUD and pressing that CUD to be productive, coming 3 years from now to say, oh, I really like that other CUD. They're not going to have any plans for you, any budget for you, anything for you. So it's best that towns who are the members of the CUDs are productive and engaged. Period.
Understood. I'm just,
Yeah.
but you can bark and yell as much as you want, and sometimes things don't happen.
And it isn't going to be easy either way.
Agreed.
Yeah. But it also leaves room that if some CUD is poking along and you're in a town that's adjacent to another CUD, that more productive CUD could effectively annex your.
Exactly. A little competition between the CUDs is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think the CUDs are all sharing the same exact purpose. So I think that we'll see. I don't think there's going to be a problem readdressing this after seeing what the first construction season is, and we'll have a lot more information as everybody finalizes who they're partnering up as we move through with this. So this is the initial construction program. We may change things the next time around, but this gives an idea.
So this is guidance, not.
Guidance.
It's a guideline, allocation guidelines.
Yes. The other question that comes up right here and comes up many places to the applications is the time frame that we want to set for the first phase that they're applying for.
Yeah, we're gonna hit that in a minute.
24? Okay,
Yeah.
we can just keep going
Yeah,
on that.
that's like paragraph 4. I think we're gonna hit paragraph 3 first, but
We have to go.
Do you want to grab FX's hand?
Yeah.
No.
So I'm not excited to open this up to the whole suite of people on the call. I'm not trying to exclude.
Oh, there went FX's hand. Fine.
If it's
Keep
something
going.
that is like, we have missed the boat
You
and,
already got him.
okay, but I just want to put this out there to the folks that are the viewing community. If we've totally missed something and you've got a major point, keep your hand up and make it, but we're trying to move through this as quickly as possible so we can turn it back around and get it out fast.
So one other question when it comes to this allocation is this thing I have highlighted here. For this first phase.
oh yeah, I see.
I don't think anyone is going to come. I should probably not make any assumptions here. But
I'm sorry, what are you highlighting?
He's highlighted
So-
applicants will be allowed up to 18 months of construction.
No, I've actually gone lower than that. The board will award up to the CUD's share for available funds, meaning we won't entertain an application that's higher than that. It's highlighted because I didn't know if we wanted to have that in there or to maintain the flexibility. but we want to know what they can get done in whether it's 18
let's
months or
look at-
24 or whatever.
So are you saying, when you say available funds, you're not talking about the, no, I don't think so. Are you talking about this to put Brian's? Or are you talking about what's been approved by the legislature or what's been
What I'm
delivered
saying
to
with their,
VCBB?
so what I'm saying right there is, so let's use any CADE example. In this this guidance, we have 24.75 million. Say we did, I mean, 25%. If we decided this is a $100 million program, we're not going to issue them more than $25 million in their first phase.
Oh, I thought
that's
you were
saying.
saying something completely different.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know that
that's what I'm saying here, but it might not be necessary.
And so first of all, use language that's consistent. The board will award up to the CUD's allocation guideline of available funds. But is that a policy that we even want to put in place, because it routes out the competition aspect you were talking about? It's saying, no, we won't make.
The language in here includes a statement. This formula is subject to change based on new data and is for informative purposes only, informational purposes only.
Yeah, but look at where he's right now. Where'd it go, Rob?
All right, I'll stop
just
scrolling.
about eligibility.
We're confusing because we're mixing dollars with 18 months, dollars and time frame, and those are two independent things. So when one needs to be primary and the other needs to be supportive of that. So what do we want to do? Do we want to, again, my instinct is to be less prescriptive than more. So what are we trying to limit the first bite they take, the size of the first bite? Are we trying to, what are we trying to do here?
So in Rob's language asks, do you want any K to come with a plan first bite for 25, for 25%
of whatever the pocket?
Yeah, the whole.
Yeah, this ties to your earlier statement, which.
Yeah, my first question would be, if they did that, I'd say, what's the time frame of this bite? When will you start and when will you end? And if it's 4 years, my confidence in that application goes down. If it's 12 months or 18 months, I'm going to say, holy cow, can you really assemble the resources to do that in that time frame? Because that would be a sprint for 18 months to get that amount of spend done, which the spend being a proxy for the amount of work they're going to get done, right? So these things all interplay each other. So that's I think you're trying to send a signal that encourages a certain behavior. I just don't know what behavior you want and what signal you're trying to send here. Is it take smaller bites?
Well, so let me just give you, any case, a great example. I don't know exactly what their numbers are, so don't take this to the bank, and I probably, but let's assume that they were, $125 million, because they're 25% of because they're 25% of what I call the 500 million, right? So if they're 125 million bucks, well, they're probably going to come to you with 25 million for the first application, right? So this gets to the real challenge. So if they're doing 1/5, so suppose they're doing 1/5 of their bill per year, 125 million, they're going to come with a $25 million for the first year. Well, now they could come in with, 50 million for 18 months. But now what we've done is we've taken that, let's assume it's only 100 million right now. They could conceivably eat up half the 100 million with their application. Is that okay with us?
Exactly, right. So what are we trying to, what are we trying to control for?
Trying to control that we don't eat it all up. Yeah, because theoretically, 100, so let's assume.
I'm going to say it in a different way. Don't we want projects that allow us to build confidence in the grantee before they ask and are allocated for their whole allocation?
Or a significant portion of it, yeah.
Right.
So they could always come back.
Maybe the first 18 months, just a second, Rob, maybe the first 18 months is up to half of their proposed or guideline allocation. I can hear the screaming out there already, right? But
I think that's too little.
Well, I'm asking you,
It could be.
up to half? Is it supposed to be
One
3/4? Is
Half
it
and
1/3?
Half in one bite?
We could just,
That's a big bite.
Well, so this is what I like about this conversation. Your judgment as project managing professionals says in 18 months, we should be seeing projects that are scaled to approximately, I'm going to throw something wild out there, 20% or not more than $10 million, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be based on the profile of the CUD, right? The more mature CUD that has 10 years of operating history and X thousands of customers under contract already, I would, generally, my instinct would be, if they want to take a bigger bite, first bite, they've got the track record to substantiate that. But CUD.
So you're going to handicap the newer CUDs.
For the reason you identified, which is smaller bites, better track record before bigger bites. You got to,
I
So-
think we can be less prescriptive here.
So,
I think we can be less prescriptive and set what they think they can accomplish in a certain number of months, but say that we're taking into account the experience of the CUD. Like, you have to show us that you could do this.
And so the statement as it's written is fine, right? Rob? The applicants should,
It's to expect, I'm here, to expect to take 18 months to complete the universal service project. Where am I?
The portion.
for
Yeah, third
portion of the universal that can be completed.
Here, next, please. That could take more than 18 months to complete the entire universal service
Oh.
project.
No.
Right, so that's everyone. If there's
Oh,
anybody out
that's-
there that's going to get
That should be
their USB
deleted.
done in 18 months, please raise your hand because you go to the front of the line. That would be outstanding, right? We
Yeah.
all love that. So I think that's none of them.
So, well, but we also don't want to make it, like throw down the gauntlet and say, oh, yeah, we're going to do that, because we're not going to fund that.
Yeah, because it'll lack credibility, right?
Yeah,
Believable.
right.
Here-
So we're going
Here's
to delete that
another
sentence.
thought, though. Here's another thought. If a CUD partner does a public-private partnership with two different providers, those providers say they can build out the entire district in 2 years. Should
I
it be
don't
limited?
believe it.
Well, we just have to judge on the merits of what comes in, right?
I
Yeah,
think
so
that's
why
what we have
put a
to do.
statement like this in there?
Well, that's my question.
Yeah, so I think.
But this is a general statement. Applicants who expect to take more than 18 months, blah, 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 are required to break projects into smaller discrete sections.
But applicants who expect to take more than 18 months,
That's everybody.
like, that's
every cut.
baiting. Rob, that's baiting.
Well, the thing is, we're not only dealing with CUDs here. That's the thing. We're dealing with other eligible providers. Like,
I know,
we've
that's
been
baiting.
talking
It's
about
still
Bolton so
baiting.
much. Bolton
Yeah, the language.
could be done in a few months. It's like 200 addresses potentially. So that's.
Should we
I'm
take
happy
out,
to entertain other wording.
should we take out the 12-month reference? A successful applicant can return to the board and seek additional funding upon completion of the initial phase of the project. Take out the 12 months.
Take out the 12 months, take out the,
Because if they rock and roll in 6 months, get it all done, come right back.
yeah,
Do it in 2,
Okay.
woohoo.
and take out the applicants who expect to take more than 18 months.
Yeah, because you've got that covered in other area around. So that's,
Okay, so I don't even need this whole sentence here. This.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll get rid of that paragraph. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
you got it covered. Anyway.
For
Well,
the
it
sake of
shouldn't be
brevity.
covered
yes.
because it shouldn't apply.
Yeah, except he's got this statement that the next statement is okay, right? And the applicant should have a total not to exceed the portion of the supply that can be.
Oh, right, yeah. Wait,
Okay.
So how
Well,
I
I want
should-
to talk, but before you move on, let's look at paragraph 3 carefully. On page 4. Applicants are committing to serve all underserved addresses identified in the proposed universal service for communication in
I
districts.
wish we could stop using universal service plan here. We don't have official universal service plans.
Well,
for
that's kind of why I'm calling
providers.
attention. This paragraph, I think, is problematic.
Yeah,
Where are you
and-
again?
Paragraph 3 on page 4, under RFP overview.
and
Third paragraph down.
overview.
well, don't we
I
need
think
universal
throughout
service
this,
plans?
it should eliminate the phrase universal service plan.
But
It's
isn't-
capitalized as though it were a thing. It's not a thing.
I I thought it was a thing.
Well, so here's the problem. I don't think that you have set this up in a way that says that you have to come in with a business plan and a universal service plan that meets a particular definition. So when is it that this body is going to review the universal service plan for each of these applicants? When does that happen, Rob?
When does that happen? That happens with, that's what they have to provide with the grant. And if it doesn't achieve that, we're doing that.
Okay, so here's the problem. If that's a precondition to a grant application, it's a universal service plan, then we better get square on what that means, because we're not.
Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
I think I want to call that out, just to say, at some point, we got to define what a universal service plan is.
Can I suggest maybe a working group to look at that? Because I think there's two different opinions on the board, and it would be really helpful for us as staff to know which one we're supposed to be writing to, and for applicants, because I feel like a lot of the questions we're getting from other eligible applicants are related to that. That question.
I think it'd be fine to have a working group on it, but we did award grant money at the last meeting that took a definition into consideration.
Yes, but we do have that, but I mean for eligible providers though. What does it mean for eligible providers other than CUDs is where I think we're still not clear.
Yeah, so I agree that you need a definition in your definition section if you're going to apply it. And Madam Chair, I'm volunteering to work with Rob on this, if we don't kill each other first.
Well, I think we should volunteer Laura as well, because I think she
there you
would kill
go.
us if we didn't involve her.
She may have some understanding from the
Yes.
legislative.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Laura and Holly, sounds good.
Okay.
I'm happy to have you
And
guys take
we'll
that
probably end up bringing a proposal back to the board.
Happy to do that. Happy to do
It's like it was somewhat defined when I went through eligibility. How I structure this going forward is I set the basic requirements for being able to accept and look at the grant. Not that there's things in here that we don't have to define or decide upon, but so we have the basic elements, then we look at the grant, and then there's a whole other section in terms of how we evaluate the grants.
Good.
Do we need to pause?
Satisfied my question on paragraph 3. Thank you.
So what? I'm sorry, Christine.
No, I just wanted, you got what I was looking for. Paragraph 3 was bothering me for the fact that we still haven't really defined what universal service plan, but we have a plan to get the plan.
So, okay. So I have B under here, defines what the approach is to providing service to all unserved and underserved locations in a town. This is the one thing where we might need to go back and forth on, since there seems to be disagreement, or communication union district. The approach may be phased and must contain binding commitments. This is another thing we want to look at, because it might not be something that's possible for outside of cut areas to provide or cause to be provided.
We're in B of page 5. Under
It's what's highlighted on the screen.
It's just very hard to see that because it's super small.
Oh, really? Oh, let me.
Yeah.
That's right. We got it. We have it in front of us.
Might be the way to do it. Tell me if this makes it bigger for everybody. Does that make it bigger for everybody?
No, you gotta go higher.
No,
What?
it didn't move.
It didn't move. Strange.
Your picture bigger, Rob, but not.
Why am I showing up here? I thought I wasn't showing up here.
I think you got it, Rob. Well,
You go bottom right.
I hope that got rid of me.
No, you're still there.
Sorry, everybody.
So I agree that the issue is in a town, and I agree that the subcommittee is going to talk about that, so this can't be resolved.
Yeah, that's some working group.
Okay, and then there's the binding commitments question. Okay, so the 18-month approval, do we want to stick with 18-month? We had suggestions of doing it as 20 months, like 2 building periods or 2 construction seasons. There's been a variety of different suggestions. So it all depends on when the grant is awarded, really.
Within 18 months, is that a feasible thing,
I
within
mean,
18 months?
Yeah, in a perfect world, you wouldn't put a number on it, but you would offer guidance that said smaller is better to start.
But
Right?
if you put that on it, then,
No, then it's ambiguous, right? So,
well,
I mean, 18 months is a fine starting point as long as it's not viewed as cast in stone.
not binding, yeah.
And there's some
Yeah.
flexibility to it, short and long. If someone has a compelling case for 24 months, we'll want to consider it, but it's got to be a compelling case. So, the message we want to send is the bigger the bite, the higher the bar on scrutiny.
But what
Well,
about
we could
more than
change
18
this.
months? Like, we don't want a project that gets approved that they're not even going to start building until 18 months, for instance.
But we could change this wording to say projects shall seek to provide service within 18 months. Make it,
so that you have wiggly room.
Do we
So
want to
we're
add
just going
something?
to be the arbiters on whether it seems reasonable.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just from an alignment standpoint, the GMP and VEC make-ready discounts, you have an 18-month clock from the time make-ready is done, the construction's done, to deliver retail service, to be able to offer retail
Oh,
service.
that's nice.
So it aligns well, and if you don't make
Okay.
that, you forfeit the discount.
Woo-hoo!
and that puts some controls and boxes around the make ready.
Yeah, it says we're not gonna do the make-ready, give you a discount on it if you're not gonna offer retail service in a pretty
Right,
tight window.
right.
I have to ask though, is every project going to have addresses that qualify, since someone else could get to them first and it's only addresses that are less than 4.1?
Yeah, so you're motivated to go get the worst ones. And you're
I
gonna
hate
drag,
that.
what,
That's so nonsensical.
really?
Yeah,
For the
because you
long-term
shouldn't be
goal?
motivated to go get the 4.1 ones. You should be motivated to do a reasonable, a logical plan, not just to get the biggest discount. I mean, how can you build like that?
Well,
And
no,
listen, I
it's not-
withdraw the question. This is just something, we don't need to go there.
It's not good building practice, but good building practice has gotten us the problem we have today. So it's meant to create an unnatural incentive to break the current pattern.
The world according to GMP. So the question I have about this section C is the words shall provide service to all underserved assets, shall make available service.
Shall seek to provide.
Shall seek to provide service of at least 100
Seek to
square.
provide, okay. So what the original purpose of this was to make sure we didn't have an applicant come in with something that wouldn't even be started for 12 months from now. So it was
That's
more
fine,
about
but you
putting
loaded
stuff
it
to
up with
use.
a lot of other language that has other meaning. Right?
Okay, is there anything we need to change to make sure for that scenario that construction must begin within a certain number of months?
If it just said, instead of the sentence, if it just said, construction needs to be completed for the unserved addresses within 18 months of approval of the application, construction completed, that'd be fine. That'd be one way to do it. Or Patty's
Just add shall seek to.
shall seek to provide. I think, your standard, are you trying to also tell them that they need to have applications for 100 square service? Because that should be a separate thing.
Well, they're not an eligible provider if they don't.
Right.
I wasn't saying
So
that,
it doesn't
yeah,
even
but-
have to be here is my point, and it's confusing because it says you have to provide service to every underserved address.
Okay.
And providing service is different than making it available.
Okay, so we can just say construction needs to be completed with 18 months and everybody's fine with that? That's a lot less words and I like it.
Cool beans.
Delete. Okay. So we still have, this is once again repeating the business plan thing. And then this question is something I should have highlighted since it seems to be very clear. Laura posted that it was incredibly clear and we don't need to address it. That if a project is in a CUD, unless the CUD gives it the go-ahead, it conflicts. That was how I interpreted Laura's email. that she posted. I don't think she's on the thing right now, but there was certainly some disagreement among other eligible providers about this, of like, say an area can get service in year 1 from a different plan versus year 3 from a CUD plan. What do we do?
This is the Bolton rule.
No, this isn't necessarily the Bolton rule. This is another provider saying, say an incumbent telephone company says, we can serve this town next year. The CUD has their own plans for it, but it wouldn't be served till year 2 or 3. Is that still there? There's an inherent conflict there. How do we resolve it? And do we interpret the legislation as saying that unless the CUD signs off on it, it's in conflict?
So this is the way I see this playing out. So I just like to pick on Champlain Valley Telecom, Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom. So Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom comes to the table and says, I'm an eligible provider. I'd like to provide this service within the Addison CUD district. It's not part of their plan. I'm gonna do this town on our own, and I'd like your grant funding for that. Are we gonna say no to them, even though they're willing to say they'll do it in 18 months? They've got a viable business plan and they have a detailed design. Are we gonna say no to them because it cuts into the CUD's plan?
Can I use a different example that doesn't involve one where they're partnering?
Okay.
So let's say it's the case of Shoreham Telephone, which serves some towns in Addison and Otter Creek, and they aren't a partner of the Maple CUD.
That's that's a better plan, yeah.
So if like we get, so what if Shoreham comes to us with an application saying that, oh, we'll invest our own money, we'll get this done next year. This town isn't supposed to be built by the CUD till year 3. Is it automatically disqualified because it's not part of the CUD's universal service plan? Or are there other steps we must take? Let's do. I'm just trying to pose the questions that are out there right now. Laura did comments in her response, was saying that because it's not part of the CUD's plan, it's not something that should be considered. And I apologize in advance if I'm misinterpreting what she said, but you all saw the email too, so.
Well, I don't think that's what she meant, but.
I guess the first question would be why, what's preventing them from collaborating to make Shoreham's plan part of the CUD's universal service plan? That would be the first question I'd have. And if it was some legit, I can't imagine there's a lot of legitimate responses to that, but if there's a legitimate response to that, then I think we have a decision to make as a board to say, either Shoreham, despite the lack of collaboration, you're good to go, and we'll be happy to do that because it's going to get a good result faster or cheaper or both. Or we get to say, no, Shoreham, we won't fund you for some reason that I'd struggle to come up with if their plan is legit and cost effective. And
so
again, I don't
It's
care
a good
who does
point.
it.
That's a good point, Brian.
Here are two examples.
Rob, hold on. Rob, hold on. It's a good point. There's going to be exceptions, and we can't plan for everything to be black and white and crystal clear. There's going to be exceptions.
So let's just take this E as written, because I also think that Laura and the legislature intended that we favor CUDs. It's kind of like, okay, incumbent telecoms, you've had your chance, right?
Yep.
So I think a letter of collaboration from the CUD must be included in the application package. Should be there, but we could add the language to accommodate the Shoreham example. You're talking about unless approved by the board.
Or in the absence of a letter of collaboration, detailed justification for why collaboration doesn't exist.
And evidence of an attempt or something.
Yeah, and then unfortunately, at that point, I think we become truly a board where we're making a decision, one way or the other, because we get to control the funds.
Just in terms of the two responses, one would be we had an RFP process. They didn't participate. They didn't apply. They had their chance. A second would be is that we're not happy with the service quality that or the customer service that they've offered, that the communities don't want this.
Yeah, but
those are two things to throw out there.
But Rob, that would be like, we're just leaving an exception, an opportunity for an exception in there in case things have changed.
Yeah, I think he's, unless authorized by the board, put that language in there. Because I think, I agree, you got that right, so. Okay, moving right along.
Okay, we talk about the incidental overbuilding, that's all defined above, industry accepted engineering standards, as well as our outside plant design standards. Comply with consumer protection, net neutrality. This is very much along with Act 71. And then we get to something that has proven problematic for the CUDs that I don't know how we can address in the short term.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
And that's about recouping grant funds and transferring ownership.
Net neutrality standards established by whom in age?
By the state, I guess we could say, because it's in state law.
Okay.
Not the state, the state.
So this next one, I would recommend that we punt on this and leave it to the legislative committee to address this. This gets to the point of the problem in the legislation there's more to it than just the transfer.
Yeah, there's actually operations by the board. Yikes.
Yeah. So these are things we have to figure out policy wise.
But if you put the applicant must agree to provisions contained in Act 71 as amended, it keeps you whole for time in memoriam. As may be amended.
Yes, as may be.
As may be amended.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that. Okay.
And then the rest of this?
Yeah.
So then there's J, and this has
Did you
to
hear
go.
that, Rob?
Then we
Did
ditch
you
the
hear
rest of
that,
it.
Rob?
Get that,
Oh, wait.
Rob?
Oh, okay. Take that out. Okay. Ditch all this.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to see what the footnote was, but we'll figure that out. So then there's J, which is saying about Treasury guidelines and what to do when there's conflicts. Like right now, we're dealing with a conflict where a CUD and their lawyer interprets the Buy American procurement issue one way, and then Guidehouse and Finance and Management interpret another way. And this is just saying that's like we have to obey what Finance and Management and Guidehouse says, since that's what the state has signed up for. And as far as I know, we don't have much flexibility or say over that, but it's just putting it in there.
They can make that their legal issue.
Yeah. I would rather I'd rather not have to deal with that. I'd rather just comply with what the state requires.
Yep. So we're just complying with what the state requires. So that's what that's in there for, because we have enough battles to take on. Right. So what's
Okay, next section.
here? Work to be performed.
I think we should stand up and at some point and take a
break.
Do we want to take a 5-minute break?
This is a good spot too. Let's see.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that.
Great.
Okay. I will.
All right.
You know, Christine, I submitted one of these a few weeks back and haven't seen the
I'll
yet.
follow up on it. Yep.
Yeah, please be sure to mute in the room because recording is still continuing.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you, Rob.
Just so you all are aware, the video is still on. Can't read lips with masks, but you know. Have you all begun? If you've all begun, you're still muted.
This is all, I mean, I've read through it.
Okay, I'm taking us
myself,
off
but
mute.
not Part of a conversation. This is all ground we need to plow, right?
All right, so back to so we're cool on, you want to
So
make that
let's
pronouncement?
do, yeah,
Upper
so the
voting.
discussion was, given the holidays and many people are traveling and the surge of COVID cases after Thanksgiving, moving to virtual meetings for at least a month or two.
Until January.
Sometime in January, we'll reassess.
So there does need to be a place for the public to attend, to come. So does that mean, Christine, that you're gonna be?
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay.
I'll come to this location, no problem.
Okay.
It's not a big drive.
All right, that works.
If you want to trade off with me, I would come to this location, but I'm not really good at starting all this.
No,
busy
I'll take
equipment.
care of it. It's okay.
Okay.
I don't mind
Okay.
driving them up
So
here.
we're on page
Page
6,
Yeah.
and it's RFP process.
Work to be performed.
I had no comment on this page.
You okay with the entire page? We're gonna move to page 7.
There's a couple of sections highlighted under proposal submission. Rob or Christine, do you want to take that?
Sure. So one thing that's come up as I've developed this RFP and with how much information we are requesting is there another way to do this? And we thought of having some way that applications can be submitted online, especially all the mapping data, would be a way to streamline the process both for the board, for presentation purposes, and for building a map and tracking projects as they go forward. We've started looking into different software packages that are out there, like Vetro Fiber Map is one of them, and that's what the state of Maine uses for their grant program, where all the data is submitted via this platform, and each applicant is given a unique ID to upload their shape files. It's also a planning tool, an evaluation tool. It has a lot of things built in that could help us with accepting applications.
Anybody
and
on the board,
analyzing.
Rob, I'm going to just cut you off. Does anybody on the board object to this? I think this is administrative and we leave it to you.
Okay. It'll be
My only question is there anything about proprietary material that is somehow vulnerable in that kind of a process, tech process?
Well, Rob and I talked about this. We do have the ability to keep it confidential. So we just have to find out from, what Rob and I need to get educated. Well, the board needs to get educated, but us specifically on what we can keep confidential, what shouldn't.
That's not my question.
It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier. They'd only be able to see their own materials, and it's a lot easier if it's in such a system versus lots of PDFs and shape files floating around via email that we're all sharing. So it's a way to streamline things, to make things easier on the administrative side, on the evaluation side, and just going forward, even with reporting and stuff. But it'll be something we'll have to discuss in the budget, because it doesn't come cheap, these platforms. We have to still do a simplified bid process to see what else is out there. The one that we've been suggested to look at was
Rob,
VetroFact.
would you have that up and running by mid-January?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's got to be built in this budget that we're someday going to talk about.
Yeah, that's, I plan on.
Yeah.
I think I'm ready to put that together.
Oh, okay. I just want to go back a page. I'm sorry. Communication regarding this RFP. It says that you're not going to talk to applicants about the substance. I assume that they should follow the RFP timetable below. I can't find the timetable. Are you saying that there's going to be a Q&A and they have to attend the Q&A?
It wasn't that there was going to be a Q&A, that we were going to create an FAQ so that all questions that come in that are related to the process will be posted on a website. And so that way every applicant has the ability to see what the answers are. It's just to keep it fair.
But Rob, it doesn't say it's about the process. It says it's about the substance.
Yeah, this is one area where it's challenging because we're providing technical support for the CUDs, but we don't want, I know, it's like, how do we
Yeah.
bounce that?
I would take this
Yeah.
out. It's just not doable.
Right. I'm also going to highlight one other thing up here with whatever mapping we have.
So you take that whole section out, communication regarding the.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Yeah,
And
we can still do the Q&A, but first.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
and you could still have people communicate to the particular email. In fact, one wonders if you can work it out with the administrative services group, the rulers of all email addresses, whether you don't want to have an email address specific to these applications.
Well, we could have it.
That's been my practice in the past.
That's all on you.
Okay, moving
Okay.
along. Trying to get us out of here before night.
For Thanksgiving.
Okay, so we're good
or
to
the
go on
next
figuring out the process for the grant program. Thank you. All the information that we want basically everything. Terms of agreement, it was once again said the 18 months. Construction must be completed within 18 months. So that's there. I'm going fast here. Stop me. So then we go into elements of the proposal. And this is where it defines the applicants are and any collaborators. Then this goes into where we might need to break it out with the working group that Holly, Laura, and I are going to help on, of like, how many years should your universal service plan be allowed to, and what are the consequences if you don't? We don't want somebody to say that, oh yeah, we're going to provide to all the addresses in the town, and then decide after their first phase, no, it's too expensive, forget it. What are the
And what does the
implications?
universal service plan even mean?
So,
Okay,
and this is kind of where I went a little bit out there. That if you don't do it in 3 years, it's really up to the board for that the assets could be forfeited. So trying to put some teeth in that, so it's not like, oh yeah, we'll get this done. It's just not in our first phase.
Where does it state that?
It's under
This is
number 3 on page 9.
So
But I
this
think you're
isn't what
gonna
they'd have to
address that as a working group.
Well, no,
Well,
this
except,
last part.
no.
No.
The working group is going to talk about what does it mean to have a universal service plan. The working group is not going to say, well, it has to be done in 3 years, or, I mean, what's the board's input on that?
Depends on what you define as universal service plan.
Okay, so we can't decide this yet. Then what about, do you want this
What it was saying is
about
3 years for
forfeiture of assets in here? If it's something you're trying to fix, I mean, I think I think return of the funds is a possibility. I wouldn't go right out there and start ingraining the forfeit of assets into our grant process if we're trying to get it fixed.
But how do we do with the situation if, say, a provider, we'll say it's an individual town, says, oh, we're going to serve everybody in this town, or whatever we define universal service as, with this wire center or town, I think it's town right at this point. well, what if they put a phase 1 application in, it covers 150 out of the 300 addresses. After they complete that, they decide, no, actually, we're not going to do the rest of the town. What can we put in there for teeth? So we don't have, I'm trying to think of like those bad actors, but.
So Rob, in my world, this is never a question because the universal service plan is for the area of unserved addresses that you're trying to address in the grant.
So this could be any set that anything they draw on the
So
map.
you have to deliver on time in your grant application.
But not for an entire community or an entire wire center even. Because this is going like an exact.
If the wire center is your project, then the wire center is your project.
But if your project is just to do 10 addresses on a road, you're able to do that, you're able to cherry pick.
Then don't approve the project, board.
I think where we are.
Quit trying to push people into unnatural acts.
That's just good policy all around. Regardless of broadband.
Wow. Yeah, no, this is entirely different than every single thing that's happened previously at a board meeting. If we're saying that we can approve a project that's only doing part of a town,
Well,
that's your prerogative. But this is.
Back off.
Hang on, Rob, you're gonna decide that with your group what the universal service plan is.
And then we're going to bring it to the board.
You're gonna bring it to the board, so don't make it.
I'm outnumbered 2-1.
Yeah, don't draw any conclusions on this one.
Okay, yeah.
Individual projects are leading toward universal service.
That's my view.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you're gonna figure this out.
Incremental, our overarching goal is universal service, and each project has to get there.
And you got the perfect working group for it, between you, Laura, and Rob.
I know you want to be the dictator of all universal service plans, Rob, but I think you're going to say no to a lot of people along the way.
I'm only striving towards some consistency here. That's all. And this is news to me here, but that's fine.
Consistency in your mind here.
We also want to give the board an opportunity to readdress things as things move, as we learn.
Not a readdressing.
Okay.
It's okay. All right. Do we? Okay, so we'll just have to come back.
Table number 3.
Table number 3. Yep.
I'm keeping a list.
So
Rob, on number 6, should that instead of say is prohibited with the prior written approval from the board be without?
Yeah, without. Yeah.
Without, yeah. Is prohibited without the approval. That's basic, yeah.
Okay.
So this was saying that we're not doing a final payment. Like we have to talk about the whole payment schedule of how we're doing this because we want to have performance payments, but it's just saying that if we don't approve it, if we don't inspect it and approve it, the final payment will not be made until any of those changes happen. And then 9 is just standard language.
What happens if some of the CUDs hire the same consulting help?
Well, they have.
Yeah, they have, and they
Does
are.
this say they can't?
I don't think so, because it's not on the same project. Should be arrived at independently without collusion. So it would be an issue if communication with any bidder, any competitor. So.
Because I would foresee they're going to have the same experts. There's only so many people in this.
Isn't this redundant to the standard state provisions that are already referenced?
This was taken from the Connectivity Initiative RFP.
Yeah, but isn't it also part of that standard state provision? So you don't have to restate it here?
I guess we don't have to. It was more of just the certification that was required to apply in the past.
Because to Patty's point, I think this is just, we're trying to collaborate. We are trying to collaborate. And so are you collaborating on a proposed bid price? That's a big question. Could that give somebody room to, I don't know. I guess I'm too tired to think about it.
Well, I would suggest deleting 9 and you put somewhere caveat in there, will comply with state. guidelines, because I agree with you, we are trying, that's the part I've always struggled with, is we are intentionally collaborating to make this happen, and
About that. Apply with attachment C or whatever, and
yeah,
we will thankfully have a lawyer on staff as of the 29th.
that's right. Boy, is he in
Has
trouble?
he said yes?
Yeah, oh yeah, he started the 29th.
Oh, thank God.
Is he in trouble?
Always like, thank goodness.
Rob and I have a pile for him.
All right, where are we?
Okay, so scrolling down here, so this is, we're gonna get into this whole universal service thing. So the general, that's how I kind of
Just
broke it
table
into
it.
two different things. I wanted them to describe, actually back up, I'm sorry. So this is general information, how they plan to use subcontractors. Stating that the only contract we have is our agreement with the CUD, with the eligible provider. So that we want to know who they're contracting with. And this is a question of how much information we want too, just to put that out there. Because we're asking for a lot with these proposals, and we should, but is it too much? Where's the line is something that we need feedback from on the board, with the board.
I don't think.
Given your experience with grants, Rob, can you give us a sense where the line is? It's a lot of money that we're doling out.
Yeah. And
The
it's
COVID recovery seems a little strange.
like, I don't think we need to do pre-approval of contracts. We didn't do that with the pre-construction grant, with this version of pre-construction grants. But contract management, I believe it's something they did with the connectivity initiative. So of how the contracts will be managed to assure compliance with satisfaction of the board, that we want to know how they're checking up. Like this goes to the experience of, say, a subcontractor doing something that results in lawsuits. For example, we want to know how they're checking up on their subcontractors to prevent there being such issues.
I think that's really good form, especially in light of some of the issues out in the field with wire being left. I think that's wise to keep.
So don't we want to see what we want to see is a good project management plan?
Yeah.
And where is this? Is this part 5? Where are you?
We're under 3.
There it is. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I forgot to look on the screen.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good statement.
I'm fine with those.
Okay. Okay, where are we here? Sorry. For some reason,
4.
my computer is not liking this because I'm connected to the state system right now, of course. Anyway, okay. Financial history, one comment we had on this was that a lot of the different projects are going to be using the same contractors or same subcontractors. So maybe we have the power to request from a subcontractor financial information, as opposed to request permission. How is this? As well as financial information.
Well,
Rather than asking for it in advance, it's saying that if we want to, we can request it directly from any subcontractor.
Just lost. Oh, that worked.
I decided to make it bigger. You don't need to see my comments. Sorry about that.
So where's the part about the subcontractor here?
So, yeah. Like, we want to review the financial information of whoever the applicant is, but do we also want to check on the financial condition of every subcontractor?
well, you're saying,
Well, so subcontractor is kind of a crazy word here, but I mean, partner or collaborator, co-grantee.
Well, it's,
But every subcontractor, I mean,
If
if
we
you
want
want
to.
to take the example from the Hoyt Family Farm EC Fiber thing, that was 4 subcontractors down.
Mhm.
How far do you want to go?
Yeah, would it be better to ask for what steps they've taken to,
That?
vet and validate the financial viability of any subcontractors, partners, collaborators, rather than us looking at their financials.
Yeah. I
Oh,
don't
that's a
know.
good idea.
Okay.
So Rob, you hear
Or
that?
are insurance
I think
policies
I
in
heard.
place, just verification of insurance
So,
policies.
so that paragraph should, what we're saying here, I like what I heard, sorry to jump in, but the point that's made here is we, in the grant application, we want to see how they vetted their partners and contractors. Should address it, and it should address it. We don't, in other words, we don't need to address it. We want to see how they're going to address it.
Yeah, and insurance policies are required under the state contracting rules anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So who cares?
But we have to make sure the insurance policy covers everything.
You need to do that in the contract when you
Mhm.
contract for the grant. We don't need to do it in the
Okay.
process.
Okay. So the board does not want to see all the entity's financial information, or does the board want to see the responding entities, but not all the subcontractors? I would
Right.
delete all of 4 or delete only from here down. We could also say they should identify any subcontractor receiving more than 10% of each award, and the board
Yeah.
reserves the right to
You
review
can
their
identify.
financials.
By name, I don't want to get a bunch of income statements.
So what we're hearing here is identify them by name, but not financial, so it doesn't really belong here, or you have to qualify not only by name. But when you say responding entity, if you have like Maple Broadband making an application, are they going to, is the responding entity also Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom? Because I'm not clear what responding entity would mean here.
I think,
Grantee?
yeah, it's the grantee, but it is when it is a partnership like that. Yeah, it is challenging to figure out how to slice that up. Does anyone want to send me language? So I think we might want to think about this a little bit more, because we want some insight into who the applicants
Well,
are, but.
So when you're applying for construction grants here, you're either an eligible provider, you're a CUD, or you're coming to the party with a CUD. And the only question we're asking is when a CUD has an operating partner, do we want to see the financials on that operating partner?
The operating partner, so what if one of their construction subcontractors is?
So you want to add that?
I thought if you covered it with, any partner within the bid or within the application.
But how can you not? Yeah, it's hard to say where the subs are. It's hard to say when you've moved from.
Yeah, so I would say we reserve the right to request. Well, first, we want to know how you vetted them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then second, we reserve the right to request supporting financial information, if we need it, if we feel we need it.
Yeah. And you
Okay.
could say, right to request supporting financial information for any, and then getting so much of the grant, but I think that's fine.
Yeah, and naming any more than 10%, I think that makes good. But I just want to know who they are. I don't want to see financials unless we
Yeah, we
request
should
it.
just know who's involved.
Right, so, but somewhere we need to stress accountability of the subs.
Wait, don't take that away. Oh.
I just moved it.
So Rob, somewhere we need to address accountability of subcontractors, given what has happened in the state with the Hoyt's family farm.
Didn't we do that?
I don't know. That might be something we do when in the
Accountability
grant
for
in the
what?
grant
For-
agreement
For
itself.
good business practices or for the grant money?
That whatever subs are being hired, that they have appropriate insurance, they're following best practices.
So that's in paragraph 2, Rob, I think.
Well, and it's also in the state contract.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
Requirements
Yeah, yeah.
that they follow, that they proper insurance.
Yeah, I don't think we need to address that separately.
Okay.
Just say,
I just think we need to hold the grant recipients responsible, and then they have to do that piece.
Can we add something like that? This is important,
go up to paragraph 2. I think.
just given the Hoyt family farm issue.
Yeah.
The ag department is worried about,
Really?
yes,
Okay,
I've received phone
Other
calls.
subcontract.
okay, that's good
So
to know.
it's saying the primary contractor is responsible. So this is, This is saying, so maybe they have to, maybe what we do is we add it under the certifications that they have and will review the insurance policies of subcontractors.
No, that they have received. Look, this is so specific. Why don't we just do that together? I think,
I'm happy to have
you know,
you.
it isn't just about insurance.
No, it isn't.
Patty's-
That's where, I was gonna go, project.
Like, you want to talk about your OSP? That's where it belongs.
Yeah. It
It
belongs in
belongs
the
in your
OSP.
OSP. Will follow best business practice to
Yeah.
preserve, to construct the network and to preserve the proper private property rights of all all properties passed or something like that.
So that's in the
Perfect.
certification. Christine, did you
That's in the
capture that?
OSP,
In the OSP,
last page. We'll
Okay,
write
so
that up.
I'm leaving that side to you, the technical details
Yeah,
there.
okay, got it.
It's,
Perfect.
and if
Okay.
you want, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that'd be great.
so what do you want me to do with number 4 here? Just end here?
I
And
don't
get
think
rid
we
of,
need that.
you don't think
It
we need
just-
it?
No, yeah, we don't need it, after information.
Oh, no.
And isn't it responding entity, isn't it a grantee or grant applicant?
Responding applicant. I need to be consistent there. It's true. Okay, and you all sent additional language on this.
Yep.
We do have a comment. I don't know if you want to take it. It's David Jones has his hand
I
up.
would really prefer we keep pushing on unless it's an absolute emergency, and have him text you if it's an absolute
Put
emergency.
it in the chat.
He just put we don't run the chat because it just becomes a
Okay.
nightmare. But he put his hand down, so I'll take it as it's not an
Okay.
emergency. So this next one, 5, this is something we're still trying to figure out internally. There's some requirements that the state has put into place in terms of what needs to be included in every proposal. There seems to be some flexibility in this, but that's where this all came from. So we could figure this out. If you have any feedback on how to make this more matching with what we're trying to do, or we can ask these questions and they can just respond.
So I'm a little confused now. The general project description is this still a work in progress?
This was taken from the addendum to 3.5 and 5 put out by Finance and Management. We received some information that we can make a case that we don't need to arrange it in this way. And I think that we can, since we're asking for a lot of these things later on in the application. So I think this might just be repetitive and we can.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of make work to me.
Yeah. So my thought is that we'll figure out how to reorganize it and see if there's anything that we don't match elsewhere. That's my thought.
Okay, I'm fine with that. And if you're going to require 3 performance measures, we need to specify what those are versus just leaving it wide open.
Right, and we'll get to that later on in the.
Okay.
I think we're in part 4, part 7 of the application. So
Let's pass over this until we've worked out our definition.
Okay, this makes it really complicated without having that definition. But one thing I should note, I did put in here that I want applicants to detail all efforts to engage the local community in the proposed project. Community engagement is something the state is pushing for any ARPA funded projects. And I think it would be helpful for having the community involved, even if it's a project for just one town. I think it's amazing that Bolton has a whole committee that's working on developing a universal service plan, that there's been that much engagement that's happened between Bolton and Waitsfield, for instance. I'd like to see that some of that proof elsewhere. That could be letters of support. We'll get to that with attachments, but that's one thing I did put in there. The other funding sources for the project is in there.
Can you please not use the word community when you mean municipality? So, because I don't know what a community is. Is that like all Chinese farmers living in the region?
And It might not be a whole municipality, depending on how our meetings go.
Yeah.
What are we opening
Or,
up?
and to your point, it could be or subject or region subject to the grant proposal.
Ah, hard to type with this delay. Okay. So this is we're going down to project description here. We wanted them to define the eligible locations to be served. This not to exceed price. And this is how I differentiated between the universal service plan and what was in this phase. I wanted a general number for the universal service plan based on their business planning for the area. But then for the grant application, I wanted them to come in with a not to exceed price. But it's going
And
to be
not to exceed. I'm sorry, your bar on your computer is over the words.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
But this is challenging when you don't know necessarily what the make ready costs are going to be yet to come onto a not to exceed price.
If you don't know what the make ready costs are going to be,
yes.
So you haven't had that estimate, you shouldn't even be applying if you have that.
Yeah, that should come out of the detailed design.
But you're not going to know the status of all the polls of what make ready work needs to be done for your detailed design. Yes, the make ready comes out of the detailed design, but
I feel like we're on a broken record here.
Oh, well, no, Rob's making an interesting point here.
You know, pre-construction, they can do poll studies.
Yeah.
They're going to get it. They're going to have an assessment and an inventory of what they have to do for work.
But they're not going to have the make ready quote from the.
They'll have an idea. They should have an idea.
That's where I'm going. I'm going right where you are. So Rob, where I was going with this is, it's going to be an estimate.
Well, is that okay?
The whole
though?
project is an estimate. So the not to exceed price is an estimate for they've got to. I like what you're saying here. They've got to give you a not to exceed price, but that's not based. That's you haven't invoiced it to get that. That's just your estimate of what the top level cost of the project is going to be.
Well, what it means is that's a maximum amount of the grant award, unless they come back and explain why it's more. But it's not an estimate.
They should be able to have a good estimate of the make ready costs coming out of the detailed design. They're not going to get the actuals until after that could be 105 days later.
And any high level design is going to have an appropriate contingency factor in. Yeah. And I mean, that's what we all do when we go build projects.
I have an observation. We are no longer a quorum.
Oh, shoot.
Is Laura on?
No, she's not on.
Is Laura Sebelius on?
No. I can see if she's still in session.
The legislature is still meeting.
Huh.
So shall we, I don't know, does anybody have Brian's cell?
He said he's going to be tied up till 3:30. 3:09.
Oh, well, I think we should, we should conclude the meeting. Because I'm just going to sit here for half an hour.
Yeah, we can't take any action.
Well, we shouldn't even be deliberating without a quorum.
Exactly.
So I think we need to take this up on the 29th.
Do we want to try to reach Laura?
It's getting more full by the minute.
All right. So Rob,
I was saying, do we want to try to reach Laura? Reach Laura.
If Laura were available,
I'll text her. But you don't think I should text her?
I think that's hard because also she's coming in midstream.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
good point.
Let's table it and let's table it.
Okay.
And we talked about
it. Let's make a special note. We are stopping at section, whatever this is.
Section 5, project description.
Number 2. This is an interesting point that reflects the conversation earlier today It shall include the price of drops based on assumed take rates. It's not just any old drops, it's standard drops, right? Standard drops on assumed take rates, but they should state what those are. Yeah, right. Just, I know we're out of kilter here, but
Do you want to take questions now? Because we're
We can't, we can take comments, we can take public
yeah, we
comment.
take comments.
Can we?
yeah, we could.
Yeah, we don't, because we're not taking
We
action.
don't have any, we don't have a quorum. And
Yeah.
Okay, if we want to do that, Michael, do you want to, you seem to be first in line, your hand is up. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just, on this point, I just want to bring to the board's awareness that, you know, right now the market prices are up for not only labor but materials, but also supply chain issues, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And you probably really need to take that into account when you look at this, as well as your timeframes for construction. You know, I'm sure everybody's doing this, you know, we're seeing it day to day, you know, our prices are definitely up. So putting a not to exceed with no get out of jail just kind of may arbitrarily raise your pricing a little bit, because you're not giving folks, you know, you're going to have to be more conservative if we have no idea. Because you certainly haven't bid this material or the work yet. You may actually have to bring in contractors from out of state to get this work done under a compressed timeline, just because of the lack of available resources in Vermont. Just something to consider.
And Michael, could you say who you're with again, just for the record?
Burlington Telecom.
Thank you. Very good points. Who else do we have, Rob? Rob, did we lose you?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. David Jones, go ahead. And up next, we have Magna Dodge.
Okay, thank you, Rob. I hope the board is keeping in mind how some CUDs at least are modeling themselves on their on EC Fiber's example, and in particular how EC Fiber and in its example DV Fiber will be the owner of the network, will be the entity that signs all contracts with the construction firms, and is being advised by its contracted partner, but assumes the financial responsibility. That is, I think, important when in some of this language that you've been going over with respect to subcontractors. Also, I want the board to, hope the board understands that the board is expecting with this RFP, with the response to this RFP, to have a complete engineering plan. Well, we and other CUDs have just received a grant award, and in our case, we haven't yet signed the contract for the grant award, and it's going to take time to develop a engineering plan, and even more time after that to go through the RFP process to select contractors. And we're not talking months, we're talking quarters. So that's the time frame that we're talking about being ready to submit a responsible response to this RFP as written. Thank you.
I'd be curious to hear if other CUDs feel the same way on that one, but Magna's up next.
Yes, and my comment really goes.
Hold on a second, Magna. Let me make sure I profile you here so everybody can see you. Okay, spotlighted. There you go. Everybody should be able to see you.
Okay. I was going to mention on the not to exceed price, but I also endorse the comments that David Jones made. I don't see how in a time frame we could submit an application for construction such as this when we don't know all of our material costs. We're going to have to go out with RFQs for all the materials that we need. That will take time. I just think I think it'd be incredibly helpful to the committee if we put together a timeline and thought about, given all the requirements of this application, what that really means in terms of when we could actually submit, when we would be able to accumulate all of the information that's being required, and think about, is there a way to stage some of this? You're staging some of our money, so maybe some of the information could be staged, but I really think we're just tremendously expanding how much time it's going to take, and we're all under the pressure of this upcoming construction season.
Can I ask Meg that
So
question?
just to update, Brian, when you left, we didn't have a quorum.
Okay.
So we basically went to public comment.
Oh, sorry, okay.
May I ask Meg that question?
Yes.
And this could go to Mr. Jones as well. So do you feel that in the pre-construction phase, you have applied for and received the funds you would need to be ready for the construction application as we're describing it?
I'll start first. To me, we understand what we have in pre-construction. That's fine. It's more the issue, as I see it right now, just in terms of some materials and how we go about sourcing those materials, what that process is to get the costs, unless we take, and we're very much like David, where we have taken EC Fiber as our role model in terms of projections and things. And it would seem to me the committee wants better information rather than maybe information that's getting stale or else theoretical. And so certainly my point would be, we want to have the latest information possible if there's going to be a not to exceed price placed on us.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And my response is that we have the in our grant award the amount of money that's needed for us to plan and go through the RFP process to be able to respond to this RFP, but we do not have the funds that are going to make us ready to actually engage the construction contractor because we won't have done the make ready yet. The whole idea was to get the make ready done and have it done at the time that we had the funds to engage the construction contractors. So this is going to, the way it's set up now, with not having make ready in the pre-construction grant, it's going to set us back months and probably an entire season.
Krista has also had her hand up. I don't know if she wants to chime in on this or if we want to keep going on this for a minute.
I'll take that as an invitation to speak. So I would echo both David and Magna's concerns. And I apologize that I wasn't here for the beginning of the meeting, so I don't know what your make ready discussion was. But under this scenario, we would lose the entire season. And I think that you can rectify that by, I think, in two ways. I mean, I personally would like to see a construction application that allows for the purchasing of materials, the payment of make ready. When we are looking at our areas and we have our route designs, we're in high level design to finalize those pieces, and we're taking several areas into detailed design. There are going to be sections of those make ready routes that we put into the utilities that they're just not going to be able to complete in a period of time. Sections where poles have to be replaced, or you need first class line workers, which is going to be the longest pole in the tent. And we're going to have to not construct those. I think it makes more sense to be issuing construction RFPs to areas that you know you're going to have make ready done in. And so the sort of framework that we're talking about here is problematic for the first round of grants. If we're talking about a round of grants that's 5 months from now, then I don't think it's problematic at all. I think it's absolutely the way to go. But if we want to make this construction season, which, you know, at least 4 of us are pushing super hard for, then we have to have some way to get our materials and to get our make ready so that when April comes, we're in place.
I have comments. If there's no one else online, I'm happy to wait, but.
I don't have any other hands online.
All right, I'll just move up here. So first I will say that we've had a policy meeting to formulate our strategy to address the construction RFP, and I'll be taking responsibility for constructing, you know, formal written response or responses to the RFP in the coming weeks. However, just to address the make ready issue, I have to echo the comments of 3 of our, you know, most informed CUD leaders that we really will need action on make ready to make this work for the upcoming season. We think that following the statutes at Act 71 will be a solution to this. If make ready can be included in pre-construction or in rounds of construction that are in advance of the completion of the rest of this RFP, elements of this RFP, will be absolutely critical to building on time. There just isn't enough time. If make ready is not going to be funded until this application is completed and funded through, there won't be enough time to be constructing in this season, and significant delays will be incurred. We presented solutions to this. DV Fiber, their proposal was in line with ours as well. We think their solution is well put together, and would encourage the board to reconsider the resolution that would transfer that make ready funding away from pre-construction, in line with the recommendations of the staff, in line with the proposal that we discussed last week, and with DV Fiber's memo this morning. So that's the position of the association, continues to be the position of the association, and we're happy to discuss and support the effort to make that change further.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So what I hear people asking for is to divide the construction grant application into 2 parts.
That was something that has been suggested. However, it remains the position of the association that we would prefer the make ready to be funded per Act 71 as a part of pre-construction. That was the case with DV Fiber and with the grant that was originally approved for them, and would be much more streamlined for them to have that grant remain intact. Our position as an association remains as such, but I think that based on the opinions of many CUDs, we'd be amenable to a solution in which make ready funds are available prior to construction in another way. So in theory, yes, but that's not the official position that we have.
So one thing I'd like to point out, one thing I want to put out to the board though too, is with this 2-part construction program, then it is open to all eligible applicants, not just CUDs. We could potentially have private providers applying for make ready for a project that we haven't approved or reviewed yet. So it's problematic to take it out of pre-construction. We could do another phase of pre-construction, or we could even do that they could come back to us with amendments for pre-construction after their design is done. But there's some challenges, just to point out.
Well, can I ask a question, or any of the CUD folks to respond to? For the CUDs that have gotten pre-construction awards already, whether they're in hand or the grant agreement's still in process, whatever, but they've got those commitments, what is preventing any one of them from submitting pole license applications for make ready right now?
I don't think there's anything preventing that. The concern is about the timeline for the actual conduct of the make ready work as it pertains to construction in the coming season. I mean,
So just take it in sequence, if you would. Just humor me on this. So you can't schedule construction for make ready. You can't do anything. The first step is getting the pole license applications in. Okay, so first my question is there anything in the way of doing that right now for the CUDs that have been awarded pre-construction grants because the whole application dollars are in the pre-construction grants. We've already kind of cleared that, right? We're not holding that up.
Right, exactly.
So it all goes to a timeline, right? The first step is the application. I think to have the applications submitted, you have to have at least a high level routing done, right? You can't be submitting, I guess you could submit applications without routing, but boy, that wouldn't make a lot of sense to me because then you're going to be risking not aligning that with your actual construction activity. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is like, if the first step is the application, what's holding up the applications? Because the way I hear it, it sounds to me like the CUDs are saying, we're ready to go, but you're not giving us the funding to go. And I have not been convinced that you're ready to go yet because no applications are going in, which have already been funded. So I'm trying to get to like truth here. And I don't mean to say anything is untruthful, but spend time on that for me. What's preventing applications from going in? Because if I felt like CUDs were like, our applications are in, we're ready to go. The distribution utilities have got it in the queue. We have to have the money to pay for the make ready. Then that would be a different matter. But we're still months away from that, even under the best scenario. And we've got this RFP process that will provide the funding, hopefully within months of time frame. So I feel like we're not that far off.
Although that funding for applications is available, we think that the timeline has the potential to become that far off. And for further on that, I would defer to David Jones or Krista, who are actually the ones writing these applications. So I will defer to them because I know that they have their hands up and would like to respond.
So before you, Krista and David, I do want to hear from you as well, just as Will had said, and thank you everybody for chiming in here. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around this as well. And the way I think about running a construction project is first and foremost, I need to know lay of the land, big picture, here's my design. Here's where I intend to go first. I'm going to attack this town, sequence it out. I have my own timeline in hand. And then I start applying to the bank for my funding. And I'm fully loaded with my design and the places that I'm going to go. And from there, it's you hit the ground running and roll. And the make ready you can apply for under the construction grant process. Just as Brian said, once you have your design in hand, that informs you where your next steps are, how you're going to phase this. Are you going to chunk it into 4, 6 build projects? It gives you the design to say with clarity to us, how are you going to proceed? And then you are ready to apply for a construction grant from us with that high level design in hand. And you can phase it with make ready first and then jump right to your construction dollars right afterwards. You can combine them. You have a lot of flexibility in how you apply. So I'm gonna put that to you. We're trying to understand why this is such a hurdle for you.
We don't see it.
Okay, can I give it a try?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we've been approved or tentatively approved for a pre-construction grant. That means that's when engineering work begins. Engineering work didn't begin before we were awarded the pre-construction grant. Now, what happens next? Well, first we do a high-level design, which takes several weeks, and then we begin the detailed design. As soon as we know from the high-level design and the detailed design what routes we need to have made ready, we will make the applications. We have 4 towns where we've done poll studies and we're prepared to do that. We can conduct the remaining poll studies while in parallel, so that when we get to those towns in our engineering plan, we will be able to use the poll studies, do the engineering, and then make applications to the utilities for the make ready. We're not doing, this is not done like, we're not waiting for the entire engineering plan to be completed before we submit our first poll application. We're going to submit our first poll application as soon as we know that we've got a viable group of polls that need to be made ready. The whole idea is that by the time I should also say that without this detailed, without the detailed engineering plans, we're not going to be able to RFP for the construction. And without the RFP for the construction, we're not going to know the updated costs of construction. And without the updated costs of construction, we can't apply for a construction grant. And we can't comply with the requirements of the RFP. So the game plan is that we have the make ready done at the time that the construction grants are awarded, and the construction grants are awarded after we've done the we've basically arranged for our construction contracts, so that as soon as you award the construction grant, we sign the contract and we go. So make ready has to be done by then. Does that help?
I mean, a little bit. So let's talk about the things you have in your control to make what you just said happen, right? So in the Deerfield Valley area.
I just want to know, we are now taking up this matter that we said we were going to put into the next meeting.
We are nothing if not undisciplined, Holly.
Just signing the road markers.
So if you have your routing done now, if you know your routing for your initial phase, you can make your poll applications now. And if you're in VEC or GMP territory, as long as you have at least one 4-1 or less location in that phase, you don't have to pay for make ready or settle up make ready until you deliver connectivity to that location or location. That's the provision of the discount tariff.
Hi, Laura.
So Brian, what if those territories have more than just GMP or VEC polls in them? Does that present a challenge for a CUD that's looking to build out in that section if it has polls that are not GMPs or VECs, if they have other polls, like say CCI polls or another Munis polls? Would that then make that challenging? Because it's my understanding that that may be an issue that we're facing here with both of these CUDs.
It could, but again, 3.700 allows for accommodations to be made on this stuff.
So do we think that CCI is going to be making accommodations on this?
I can't speak for CCI.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
you also
that's
don't
a
want to
laugh.
set them up for failure. So can I ask? I'm sorry. So Brian, I'm asking you now. What I heard David say is that in order to get their construction RFP done, they have to have the make ready done. That to me is the linchpin. If that statement is normal practice, and Krista, I apologize, I don't remember this anymore, but if that statement is true, then we can't have a grant application that doesn't have make ready done.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down exactly what he said. Make ready has to be done by the time the construction awards are granted, right?
I heard it differently, required for the construction RFP. That's even earlier.
Oh, yeah, we want the make ready to be done at the time the construction RFP, the construction funds are awarded, so that we can immediately proceed to the construction.
That's a timing. That's just a timing thing.
It's a management issue.
Yeah, but I say just in the sense that we also can't predict exactly when that's going to happen.
But I'm going to come back to, there's nothing precluding you from applying for a construction grant for the make ready.
And the
What
language of.
my head is around in my experience of my experience of building power projects, it's not dissimilar to what you're doing, is you have a design plan done. You finish up, this is what I'm going to build. You're working on that right now. And then at some point in that work product, you're going to pivot and say, okay, we're going to move toward construction. Part of that construction process is make ready. You apply for a make ready grant if you want to do this in that sequential order. You apply for a make ready grant to fund the work you're going to do in your phase one of your project.
The construction.
Right.
Exactly.
If we can have your confidence that what we're proceeding toward is a complete engineering plan for phase one, which is our first year of construction, and that we can proceed with some aspects of the plan, even while even before we have completed the engineering plan. We can begin make ready on the first segment that is engineered. We could begin that as soon as that first segment is engineered. We have to do some engineering before we ask for make ready, which answers Brian's question, but we do not have to complete all engineering before we begin any make ready.
You got it. You've designed part of your project. You said this is what we're going to build. You've engineered it, and you come in and ask for grant dollars, and it sends you on your way. And then you come to the next.
But we're going to have as often as weekly phases of make ready. As soon as we have a coherent group of polls to be submitted, to be applied for, we want to make the application. And we don't know when they're going to come back to us with the cost estimate. Now we do agree with the idea that a portion of the make ready costs will be billed in arrears, upon completion. Of course, we are going to need to have the money to pay for them at that moment. But there is still going to be a large amount of funds that we're going to need to pay for make ready in advance. And in our memo, we've detailed that, but in essence, it's not going to be less than $600,000. And if we don't have it, we're not going to be able to do the make ready.
I'm just letting you know that I have a hard stop at 4.
Okay, I do as well. What we're struggling with is the accountability of these funds. And the worst thing that could happen with all of us is that we distribute a bunch of money and let's say make ready gets done and then the project doesn't move forward.
Yes, ma'am.
We all get pie in the face. The accountability issue is really important. And that's where the design tells us, you've done your due diligence to plan this out. We understand what's coming next. We understand your process. We can turn that corner and issue grant dollars because you're like, here's the design, and this sets the stage. And then you turn that corner in terms of applying for grant dollars for the construction side. And in my head, I still see make ready in the construction mode, but it's framed with a design with it. And without that design, I feel like we are just throwing money out. And it doesn't feel accountable.
We hope that
responsible.
We hope that you can manage by exception in this sense. We selected our partner GWI through an RFP process, which Joanne Hovis of CTC described as the most thorough and detailed RFP she had seen in 25 years of experience. Okay, GWI is a firm that has a stellar reputation in the industry, and you can ask Joanne Hovis about that as well. Now, we're asking for you to work with us to help us get our project going, and it frankly would appear to us that if we fail to achieve the expectations that we've set, in our grant application, which included the proposed agreement with GWI and a description of how we got there. If we fail along the way to achieve your expectations, well, then shame on us, and you have every right to look at our subsequent grant applications with a jaded eye. But we hope that you can view us as a responsible entity working with a responsible partner and heading in the right direction. And we certainly hope that our grant application, which had 15 minutes of review in the meeting, was evidence of that.
Krista has her hand up for one time.
Krista?
So in response to Brian's question, we are entering make-ready applications. So in addition to the areas that we've done in Concord, I have 7 applications for 200 poles apiece that are in process and awaiting coordination with their lacking 401 services to apply for that. So we do have route design. We are in process of making pole applications in different utilities. In regards to the tariff and how it applies, I think that there are differences in opinion in terms of how the tariff is read, because it does say the customer shall enter into make-ready cost reduction agreement and pay the net make-ready work costs in advance of VEC's performance of the make-ready work. So that is the first concern. There is a willingness on the part of both GMP and VEC to work with us. There's also an acknowledgement that there is a certain level of requirement from the PUC under Rule 3700, and that there would need to be an exception from the PUC to move beyond that, which maybe that exception is not hard to get, but it feels weird to be asking the PUC for an exception when it's something that we should be able to be addressing through the VCBB process. So the first point that I'm making here is that we can put in applications, and we are. I understand the point that you're making about, well, if you look at Rule 3700, it can take up to a certain amount of time in order to process your make-ready application. But the reality is that in a lot of circumstances, it doesn't need to take that much time. And so if we have, as an example, our make-ready application submitted on the 23rd, and we go at the same pace that we have been in our previous make-ready applications, then we would need the funding for a make-ready ride-out before the end of December. So we would do the make-ready applications, those are in, right? Those will be in on the 23rd. They're completed and waiting for my approval. The make-ready ride-out would occur sometime within, let's say in this fast case scenario, because there is availability right now, which is what we've been told. We've got time right now. So if you work with us right now, we can so let's say it's 2 weeks, we get a ride out in. Let's say it's, the second week in September. And the estimate has to come by the rules within 5 days of the ride out. And so you already have it. Now, they don't start technically, because otherwise there's the whole reason Rule 3700 was created was so that people didn't just put out applications where they weren't necessarily ready to stand up for. So the second piece that I'll make is around the VEC GMP versus others. Lyndonville Electric Department is a key part of the primary piece of backbone that we're creating, and obviously doesn't have any of this tariff, is subject to Rule 3700. So we believe that if we're demonstrating here's the order of events, here's why it needs to happen now, that you've got an understanding of here are the areas the applications are going in for, here's the areas that are needed money for. Our proposal is for a sub portion of GMP and VEC, and for the full portion of the Lyndonville Electric Department. We're just asking for a small amount of make ready to get us through to a construction period. And so, you know, even if you just limited it to 100 miles per CUD, which is really, you know, a quarter's worth of work, that at least gets us to the point in time. And, you know, it would be nice if it was 150 or 200. I'm not trying to set a number here, but it would at least get us to a point in time where we have the rest of the information that you want as part of your construction. Thanks.
Krista, could you apply right now to us for a grant for the make ready work, for that make ready work? For construction grant.
I could, but not under the requirements that you currently have put into this, into the construction grant. I couldn't.
Exactly, have to break.
Right,
out
like I'm not gonna,
separate
so
RFP.
we have 3 levels, right? So we have route design. I've spent 8 weeks working on route design, right? For 50 towns, right? So we have route design and we have prioritization of our OLTs, which by the way, are not town by town, right? Like we have 22 cabinet locations throughout the Northeast Kingdom, and almost every OLT, every cabinet location goes into 3 or 4 towns, and almost no OLT actually covers the entirety of that town. It's just the way that the electric grid works up here with 8 different utilities coming together. But I lost track of my point. What was your question?
So the question is,
could I
you
apply now?
for a
So
construction
yes,
grant right
so
now?
the first level is, so that first level is route design. We have a route design. The second level is the high level design with all of the interaction of the outside plant design, which we've also gotten, right? So the high level design takes all of the decisions we made around engineering and outside plant and all of those decisions and marries it with your route design and comes up with the high level design, which is we're having 144 here and 96 here and 48 here.
You mean
So
the detailed design?
That's the high, no, that's the high level design.
Okay.
That's the high level design. That will be done. That will be done, I think, at this point in mid-February. In the meanwhile, we're going for detailed design on everything we intend to construct next year. So that's in 3 different utility territories. The detailed design is beyond the high level design. The detailed design is actually a work packet that I'm going to hand out, right? And so the work packets that get handed out depend on the make ready areas that are done. So if a utility has a make ready area done, then that's what we'll do. So for example, probably by, I would say, the end of November, first week in December, we'll send to the design team our our detailed design request for Waterford, which is where we have a USDA grant and is the next construction area that we're going to. And that detailed design won't include, the make ready won't be completed before we do that. Of course not, but we're also not waiting for the make ready to be completed. Do you know what I mean? I'll put together a detailed Gantt chart that helps understand where the numbers are and share it confidentially, not as part of our application, because I don't want to be reporting against the level of detail that's in our Gantt chart. That's why we've put a simplified timeline in ours. So maybe that will help and we can discuss it again next week.
I mean, to me, Krista, that sounded like you are ready to apply.
She can't meet the requirements in the RFP as we've described them today.
Construction grant or requirements should be tuned to what is being applied for. If it's just for make ready, we don't need drop specs and things like that.
Exactly. That's what has to be said, though.
That's why it should be in pre-construction, because that's the more flexible.
Rob, we can't actually hear you.
Saying that's why it should be in pre-construction, because it's more flexible and we can do performance standards if they have to come back with us and show us what's been designed and then be able to provide it. would be a way around this. I also encourage you that if they already have an approved grant that has it in it, that they just come to staff and we take a look at it and approve it to prevent any further delays. Would be one way around this. I also just wanted to point out we have a lot of hands and Laura has her hand up, but she may have to go vote too.
Laura's
So
had her hand up forever.
let's get Laura,
Laura,
in there.
jump
Still
in.
can.
Laura, are you there? Can you jump in?
Yeah, so I would just say that I think Rob's suggestion is a good one. I have to go.
Did you hear that? She had to go.
Yeah, she's voting. So
she was agreeing with Rob putting it into pre-construction.
Yeah, if I may, Krista, would it be correct to say that you are proceeding with your pre-construction grant application under the idea that per Act 71, pre-construction, including make-ready costs, would be included, and that would simplify the situation considerably?
Yes, that's what we're doing. We have included pre-construction in our both make-ready applications and taking a sub-portion of those make-ready applications and requesting funding for the make-ready on that. It's a pretty limited subgroup for now, but yes, that's exactly what we've done.
I can't remember, have we approved that application?
No, we haven't seen anything.
So the position
We
of the
submitted it
association-
today, sorry.
Yeah.
it's in your email
believe
boxes
that-
now.
We believe that if the board were to rescind its resolution, pushing make ready to construction, to stick with Act 71's provision that make ready work associated with the construction of broadband networks to be included in pre-construction grants would effectively resolve all of these problems.
I don't really appreciate the legal definition that you're proposing because it doesn't say that make ready is excluded from construction, and it gives the board wide latitude to set some criteria, particularly in regard to accountability. So I understand that that's the position of Akuta, but I don't like the legal argument that you're suggesting. So I'm just giving you a little feedback on that, Will. So is there other is there other ways to think about this? It's just a matter of timing and how we slice and dice the grant process, from what I can see. And so we've now spent a half an hour of our time hearing the testimony about make ready that we weren't going to consider today, and no worries. But the fact of the matter is now either we should take some action on it in the next 7 minutes, or we should, how are we going to address this efficiently the next time we gather? Because, we do lose momentum between.
Yeah, I mean, Krista's offer, which I thought was gracious of her, to send us the Gantt chart, which would show us the sequencing of activities and costs. Maybe that will illuminate this in a way that we all say, now we get it. But from what I've verbally heard here today, I haven't been convinced compellingly about the timing thing that I've been kind of pushing back on.
So I'm going to push back on that just a little. What I think is true is that we've made pre-construction contained so we can manage it. And we
have a budget.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And reasonably so, including accountability. And then we've made this big application for construction. I hear that what's driving behind all of this is the urgency of getting into construction season next year. Now, one question is that a reasonable concern, or is anybody really going to be ready for construction next season? I don't know that we're in a position to judge that right now, but that would matter to me. The second part is maybe we really do need an interim construction grant that allows for these make-ready construction costs, if that's how we want to bucketize it. I mean, our interpretation is that make-ready in the pre-construction phase, under practices of good management, is about make-ready applications. And so we can leave that intact, but maybe we should acknowledge that if we want people to do this in a phraseology kind of way, to your point, that we need to make a grant application process that allows for that.
I just want to add that there's a lot of stuff written in legislation of what's required for the construction program as opposed to the pre-construction. So that I have to keep saying that over and over again. But I think Krista has something to say. There's other hands, but we have less than 5 minutes left. So I don't know what to do with all that.
I want to go on I want the microphone for a second. My hang up is I'm not willing to dole out significant funds to go build things without any sort of study plan, roadmap. Krista, what you laid out, you've got a route plan, you've got high level design, you're 2/3 of the way there, or if not 100% of the way there, to ask for funding for make ready construction funds. If there's a way to simply do that in a simple mode, somewhere between pre-construction and construction, we have something in between, but there has to be some sort of anchoring plan of how this makes sense. I'm uncomfortable doling out millions of dollars with no plan. That I will.
Even if you've got a stellar partner and a fabulous RFP process.
There's got to be something there. It's like saying, I'm going to give you $1 million to go build a house and there's no design for the house.
We build out millions of dollars in pre-construction without a plan, which was fine. That's the point of
But that's the point of pre-construction.
Exactly. As we get towards deliverables,
right,
they've got to link to activity and plans. And
as we start to build things, there's got to be some sort of plan there to anchor us. Without that plan, I'm uncomfortable. We could do something, we can meet in the middle. I think we can meet in the middle, but there's got to be some sort of grounding so that we can support this funding went for this activity associated with this game plan.
Maybe you can meet in the middle with a plan that is provided as part of a pre-construction application.
It could fall probably on either side, but the requirements should be more formulated. Like you should get those first pre-construction pieces underway before you get to your make-ready construction. And since it's called construction, and Rob, all due respect, but we could make a first step into the construction grant that is part 1 of construction, that's make-ready construction.
Not under legislation, and we'd have to open it up to everybody. That's the challenge.
We would have to open it up to everybody, and that's part of the point.
So
could we just do something as simple as within the pre-construction allocation, if the CUD chooses to use some of those dollars on make-ready construction costs, we're okay with it?
If that's what, I mean, you're really the guider on how.
I just don't want to blow up the 30. We had 30 million allocated for pre-construction. I don't know how thoughtfully that was done, but I like budgets, and to indiscriminately, no one would be able to tell me, even if we turned the green light on, to say what should it be if we include construction or make-ready costs, because everyone would have to go out and estimate it.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to keep the 30 so that we can get on to what's next. That's my whole thing.
And if it's within the 30 million, that's one way to do it.
Right.
Show us some reasons.
But doesn't it have to be not only within the 30 million, but within the allocations that you've made?
Yeah, that's what I was realizing.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, within their allocations. So I know Irv is trying to get in here, but we have 1 minute left, so I don't know what to do.
It's stayed within their retained pre-construction budget. That's a risk I'm willing to take.
Which was the case with Geographic
Redundancy.
Yeah. I think you got to the root of the issue. The root of the issue we got here because, remember, I came back and said we need more than 30 million. You said, why do we need more than 30 million? Because we're going to have.
I said, what's the number? And you said, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I said,
I think what was coming back was coming back.
Well, but it's a circular loop, see, because if we, at the time, we were considering, not you, the board, we were saying, okay, if you need make-ready funds, if you need make-ready construction funds, then I need to go back and get more pre-construction. The board said no, which is fine, right? But that no means that we're keeping to the 30 million, which means we don't have the money for make-ready construction, unless the CDs can
I'm
figure that out.
uncomfortable doling out
Yeah.
50, 60 million without any plan.
Yeah.
I think that is irresponsible.
Is
as a
anyone
board member.
uncomfortable with the concept, keep the 30 million and at the discretion of the awardees, if they want to use any of their award to do make-ready construction, as long as they stay within their pre-construction award? I'm fine with
Second.
that. No, don't do that yet. I'm fine with that because it
Yeah, I think
it
you
fixes the
don't make a
risk.
motion now, but
It fixes the risk. We're still, the 30 million is still the
Still
30
in
million.
pre-construction mode. If they eat it up and make ready and they have no design,
Okay, we're very
yeah,
close to a
you
decision. Can I-
give us some guidance. Well, why don't
I
we
recommend
leave
that
it
we
that way?
take this up at
Yeah.
the top of the next meeting.
Right.
Continuity.
And what Rob and I will do is we'll go look at some numbers, what that means.
And
We're
I
not
think
gonna be able to look at.
Numbers have to come from the CUD.
No, but we're not going beyond the allocation because we're limited to the 30 million.
Right, so 30 million, so there's your number. What
Yeah.
number do you have to work out?
Yeah,
yeah, Brian said, don't expand the number.
All right,
right. I thought we had a motion though.
No,
Withdrawing?
withdrawn,
Okay.
Provocative.
just trying to.
yeah, I don't want to
leave
make it
my
fast
time,
motions.
Which I have to do, I'm sorry.
Nope. it's okay.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I guess.
all those in favor say aye.
It's a shame.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
And Christine, you're doing the notes, right?
Yes, I am, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Rob, will you please invite Representative Sibilia and myself to a meeting on the definition of universal service plans?
Certainly.
Thank you.
And did we just
Just adjourned.